owner of the US Mega Farmest video is Puremont para Intratnamiento Wino Infringe de Recos de Originales. Los Direcos de la Novela y la Imagen son del otro original, no reclamamos propiedad. No te gusta esperar y quieres escuchar este fanfic completo ahora? Suscríbete a nuestro Patreon, donde encontrarás los mejores fanfics. Chapter 626 Zoom and Gyo's Abnormality. After working for 2 or 3 hours, they finally emptied their 2 containers. When everyone looked at the fat giant groupers, they almost treated Kinzu as a god. These precious fish are not easy to encounter, it depends entirely on luck. Noticing the eyes of the crowd, Kinzu touched his nose and explained with a smile. Well, don't look at me, these are caught by others, I just bought them at a low price. After hearing this, everyone was relieved. Simon smiled and said, Boss, then you'll make money. It is becoming more and more difficult to catch these guys now. Kinzu smiled and said nothing. What a joke, now that people have caught these good things, they will give them to you at a low price. Do you think that fishermen nowadays are stupid? After all the giant groups were loaded into the car for Chenmu, Kinzu sent him away. Anyway, he couldn't help with the rest. The groups were shipped away, and only the stonefish were left. Kinzu stroked his chin and pondered for a long time, and decided to freeze them directly. There was no other way. If they were not frozen when shipping from the United States to China, they would probably have gone bad by the time they arrived. It would take 2 or 3 days to get from here to China, plus the time wasted on the road, so a week would be considered fast. Although, he could also put the fish in a container and let Cheese take it all the way back from the sea. But what's the point? For tens of millions, he was not so stupid as to let Cheese cross tens of thousands of sea miles. By the time he took the frozen stonefish and checked it in Boston and returned to the ranch, it was already dark. Driving in the ranch, looking at the ranch covered with ice and snow through the hazy night, Kinzu now felt a different taste. Entering the room, Daha and Xiaohe, who were being tossed by the little girl next to the fireplace, rushed over like the wind as if they saw a savior. What's wrong? Kinzu hung his coat at the door, picked up the little guy with a smile, and walked over to the sofa beside him. Uncle, look, they are getting lazier and lazier. They don't even go out for a walk. Shirley came up to see this and complained to the little guy with an innocent look. Kinzu picked up the 2 fleshy front paws of Daha and said with a smile, It's time to lose weight. Look at how fat it is. It can hardly walk, right? Shirley nodded her head in agreement. Yes, you need to lose weight. It's not fun to be fat. Kinzu was embarrassed. It seems that they are not fat just for you to play. Yes, lose weight. Kinzu rolled his eyes and asked Shirley with a smile, Little girl, this difficult task is left to you, okay? Me? Shirley pointed at herself, a little confused. Yes. Kinzu encouraged. Take them for a run every morning, won't you lose weight this way? Hearing this, Shirley's little face was a little tangled. It was so cold, she also wanted to sleep in the morning. But thinking about Daha's increasingly fat body, the little girl gritted her teeth and agreed. Okay, then I'll take them for a run every morning. As she said that, the little girl picked up a few of the little guys, asked them to sit in a row in front of her, and began her lecture. That night, Kinzu leaned on the soft cement bed, and in front of him was Zoom and Gyo's smiling face. What did you say? What do you want those things for? At this moment, Zoom and Gyo looked at the computer with a surprised face. Kinzu just asked her to go to the bookstore to find some introductory Chinese textbooks. Kinzu stretched and explained with a smile. Shirley, do you remember? Zoom and Gyo thought for a while, then nodded. Is it that little girl? Are you going to let her learn Chinese? Kinzu nodded. Well, she has lived in the United States since she was a child, and now she can only speak English. This won't work. Zoom and Gyo smiled and blinked, and deliberately said, You can't do this, she may not like to learn. Kinzu snorted twice, and said in a very firm voice, She doesn't have the final say. Okay, I know about this, I'll go back and look for it, and try to bring you everything. Zoom and Gyo smiled lightly and didn't continue on this matter. Kinzu nodded and asked expectantly, Mingyo, when can you come over? I miss you so much. Really? Zoom and Gyo blinked her big eyes, looking very moved. Kinzu was delighted when he saw this, and hurriedly said, Of course it's real, it's realer than real gold. Zoom and Gyo, who was on the other side of the computer, held her chin with her hand, leaned over the computer, and asked jokingly, Miss me so much? Didn't you find 2 sisters for me in the United States? Ahem. Kinzu was almost choked to death by his own saliva. He coughed for a long time before he calmed down his excitement. After dodging Zhu Mengyo's eyes that were fixed on him twice, Qin Zhu said with a guilty conscience, "How is it possible? Mengyo, you think too much. Am I the kind of person?" Zhu Mengyo's beautiful big eyes narrowed into two slits involuntarily. After nodding heavily, she smiled and said, "I think so. You're slandering me. I want to appeal." Qin Zhu looked at her with resentment. How could this woman be so smart? Hehe, Zhu Mengyo smiled lightly, and did not continue this topic, but said, "I will be there in about a week, just before Christmas." Qin Zhu breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was a little surprised why Zhu Mengyo did not ask further, he did not think too much about it, but said with concern, "Then you must keep warm when you come. It is snowing here now and the weather is very cold." Nodding, Zhu Mengyo said in agreement, "Well, I checked the temperature where you are, and it is quite cold, so I have packed some thick clothes and sent them over. It is estimated that they will arrive in the next 2 days. Just remember to sign for them." Qin Zhu looked at Zhu Mengyo in surprise. When did this girl become so smart? Being stared at by Qin Zhu, Zhu Mengyo turned her head away somewhat embarrassedly, and explained stammeringly, This was Suruhi who reminded me. She is so thoughtful." Qin Zhu smiled and sighed, then said, "Don't worry, I will pay attention. Call me when you come, and I will pick you up in New York." Zhu Mengyo nodded excitedly, and chatted for a few more words, and then hung up that video with some reluctance. After closing the computer, she lay on the big bed with some weakness, sighed deeply, and murmured, "Is it really right for me to do this?" No one answered her question, and no one knew what she was asking. However, in a corner of the computer desk, there were several photos scattered among them, and the protagonists in the photos were Qin Zhu and. "Today, my luck is really bad. The company has a power outage and I have to take a day off. I live in the dormitory and can't type without electricity. I finally waited for the power to come back in the afternoon, but the computer was broken. Alas, the day off was wasted, and it cost me more than 100 yuan to repair the computer." Perhaps it felt that they had played long enough. After 2 days and nights of continuous raging snow and wind, it finally stopped on the morning of the third day. In the morning, when Qin Zhu opened the curtains and watched the ray of morning sun sliding into the room along his fingertips, his mind was also opened up a lot. Since Zhu Mengyo confirmed the time of her arrival that day, his mood has become a little complicated. Qin Zhu's first reaction to Zhu Mengyo's arrival was to give her both hands in approval. After all, in a foreign country, without a familiar person to accompany him, Qin Zhu always feels a little lonely. Although Eva and Mobica are so passionate, Qin Zhu still feels uneasy. "I can't tell why, I just feel that there is always a sense of illusion and unreality between me and these people. But Zhu Mengyo is different. She started to contact women from the day she left the campus. Although the two of them didn't have any substantial contact at the time, Zhu Mengyo's care and concern for him were not fake. So, when it was confirmed that Zhu Mengyo came to him as a girlfriend, Qin Zhu was still very excited. However, after the excitement, some problems must be faced. That is, Eva, Mobica, Onid, these 3 women who had physical contact with him, how should they be dealt with? Sighing, looking at the endless Appalachian mountains in the distance, Qin Zhu thought secretly in his heart. Mobica knew that he had Eva and Onid, so there should be no problem. And Eva also knew that she had Mobica, so there was no problem. Now the key to the problem lies in Zhu Mengyo. If Zhu Mengyo knew that he had so many women, would she directly chop him with a knife? After all, after he took her first time, he left her alone and ran to the United States. Thinking of Zhu Mengyo's little appearance when she was furious, Qin Zhu felt that he was a little dangerous. However, even if he knew that he would be in some danger, Qin Zhu couldn't stop Zhu Mengyo from coming to the United States. First, he didn't want to, and second, he couldn't stop it. Oh, forget it. There'll always be a way out when you reach the mountain. Now we can only take it one step at a time. Qin Zhu sighed and was about to hush up when he heard a childish voice behind him. "Uncle, why did you get up so early?" Qin Zhu turned around and saw the little girl rubbing her sleepy eyes and looking at him on the soft big bed behind him. Perhaps because of his guilty conscience, Qin Zhu took the little girl who was sleeping alone back after knowing that Zhu Mengyo was coming. Although it felt a bit like covering one's ears and stealing the bell, Qin Zhu had no good way. He just hoped that this would dispel some of Zhu Mengyo's suspicion. After all, it would definitely be inconvenient to do the thing with the little girl sleeping together. Shaking his head, Qin Zhu put aside his thoughts. Seeing that the little girl had woken up, he smiled and pulled up all the curtains. Is it still early? Look at what time it is now. The little girl looked at the alarm clock on the bedside and muttered, isn't it only 7 o'clock? Qinzu didn't say anything, but pointed to the big sun shining with golden light outside the window. Surely, it's a sunny day today. Do you still remember what you promised your uncle the day before yesterday? The little girl blinked her cute big eyes, looked at the sun shining through the window, and looked at Qinzu in a daze, not knowing what he was talking about. Seeing this, Qinzu smiled and reminded, "Da hectares and dau." Ah, that's right. The little girl exclaimed, hurriedly lifted the quilt, and climbed out of the bed. Uncle, why didn't you wake me up earlier? Da hectares and the others must be waiting anxiously. Waiting anxiously? Qinzu couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Even if you let them sleep for a day, they wouldn't be anxious. After washing the little girl and changing into a thick new set of clothes, Qinzu sent her to find Eva. There is no way he doesn't know how to comb the little girl's hair. When the little girl dressed up and walked downstairs, the brothers Daha and Daha were still sleeping in their respective nests. Especially Daha, who kicked one foot on the face of Xiaohe, as if he disliked it. Although disturbing people's sleep is a very bad habit, the little girl doesn't think so. After eating a simple breakfast, the little girl went straight to the nest of Daha and offered free wake-up service one by one. Woo! After a few dissatisfied whimpers, Daha opened his misty eyes and stared at the little girl blankly, wondering what the little master wanted to do. Get up quickly, let's go for a run. Seeing that several guys were awake, the little girl put her hands on her hips and shouted in her childish voice. What? Run. Several little guys squeezed into the nest together, shaking their heads like rattles. Going for a run in such a cold day? Are you stupid? Come out quickly, or I'll use force. The little girl raised her eyebrows and looked at the lazy guys in front of her with an unhappy face. If it weren't for you, would I have to get up so early? The little guys still shook their heads together. Auntie, leave the dog or tiger away out, we really just want to sleep. The little girl was so angry that her brows were furrowed, and she wanted to beat these guys up directly. But when she thought of the method her uncle taught her, her brows relaxed immediately. Hee, if you don't go running, you won't have breakfast. Breakfast? Several guys moved forward and felt a little hungry. Not going yet, right? Then there's no lunch either. Lunch? Several guys moved forward again, looked at each other, with a look of entanglement and desire on their faces. Seeing that this was not enough, the little girl raised her eyebrows slightly and her voice became louder. If you don't come out, you won't have any food for the whole day. Woo! Daha couldn't help it first, wagging his tail, forcing himself to run to the little girl's feet, and spinning around. Hee, Daha is still good, come, this is for you. The little girl took out a few pieces of beef jerky from behind her like a magic trick, and handed them to Daha with a smile on her face as a reward for being the leader. Daha was a little stunned, looking at the pieces of beef jerky in front of him that exuded an attractive aroma, and felt that his saliva was about to flow out. He couldn't wait to pick up a piece and swallow it. Daha was still complaining in his heart, so there was such a benefit, why didn't you say it earlier? If you had said it earlier, wouldn't I have come out earlier? Now, looking at Daha chewing beef jerky with relish, the remaining three little guys couldn't bear it anymore, and rushed up like a swarm of bees. What about the promise of advancing and retreating together? What about the promise of sharing happiness and suffering? You just left us brothers behind and came to eat beef jerky by yourself. What about the trust between dogs and dogs or tigers? Thanks to the Taoist priests for their support. Chapter 628. The luggage arrived. Why do you bother the little guys? Isn't it good to be a little fatter? Eva came to the pergola with a cup of hot coffee, stood beside Qinzu, and looked at the little guys running not far away with some distress. Although the snow had stopped, the wind in the early morning was still quite cold. Even with a fur hat with velvet, the little girl's face was red from the cold. Compared with the little girl, the little guys behind her were even worse. They were shivering while running. It's okay, it's good for the little guys to move more. Qinzu looked at them with a smile on his face, not as worried as Eva. The reason why the guys were asked to move more was because Qinzu found that, perhaps because of their young age, the spiritual liquid fed to them was not completely digested. Otherwise, with the effect of the spiritual liquid, they should have been reborn long ago. After hearing what Qinzu said, Eva gave up persuading her and just watched from the side with distress. Just when a cup of coffee was about to be finished, Eva finally spoke again. Qin, how about my sister and I move to the cowboy apartment? Qinzu was stunned and asked subconsciously. Why? Isn't it good to live here? Eva lowered her head and sipped her teacup, and said softly, I'm afraid living here will bring you unnecessary trouble. Kinzu was silent for a moment. Yes, moving out is the best solution. But can Kinzu let them move out? Okay, when we were playing, we wanted to live together every day and get tired of each other. Now that the real girlfriend is here, let them move out. Apart from anything else, Kinzu himself can't get over it. And, what do others think of them? Kinzu showed a gentle smile, reached out and gently pulled Eva's little hand, and said firmly, No, just live here with peace of mind, there is nothing inconvenient. Eva looked up in surprise, looking at Kinzu, feeling a little overwhelmed. Well, but isn't Zhu coming? Kinzu shook his head and said with a smile, Yes, she has come in, but you don't have to leave. Eva wanted to say something, but Kinzu didn't give her the chance to continue, and continued. Okay, that's it, just do what you should do, I believe she will understand. Seeing Eva nodded and left, Kinzu felt a little disappointed. That's what he said, but if Zhu Mengyo really made a fuss, how should he deal with it? Just when he was having a headache, his cell phone suddenly rang. He took it out and looked at it. It was a local number he didn't recognize. Without thinking too much, Kinzu picked it up directly. Hello, is this Mr. Clean? There is a courier for you. Kinzu was a little stunned when he heard the voice of a middle-aged man on the phone. He asked hurriedly, Are you from China? Where are you now? The other party smiled gently and said respectfully, Mr. Clean, I'm at the door of your manor. Is it convenient to deliver it in? Or do you want to come and get it? Then please deliver it directly. I'll wait for you at the door. After hanging up the phone, Kinzu was a little confused. When did the express delivery in the United States become so active and punctual? Soon, a sky blue small box truck drove over from a distance. When the car stopped at the door of the villa, Kinzu was about to go over, but Ween and Aya went to meet him first. The door of the small truck opened, and a middle-aged white man walked down and looked at the luxurious villa with some envy. When Ween and Aya came to meet him, the middle-aged white man quickly took out a receipt and handed it to Ween carefully. Ween took the receipt and looked at it. After finding that there was no problem, she signed it with a few strokes. After collecting the signed documents, the middle-aged white man came to the back, opened the door of the car, and began to move things down. 1 box, 2 boxes, 3 boxes. Under Kinzu's stunned gaze, in just a short while, the middle-aged white man unloaded 20 large suitcases from the unremarkable small truck, and they were all oversized. Kinzu was no longer calm, and he walked up quickly without caring whether it was dangerous or not. Seeing Kinzu come in, Aya became a little alert and carefully protected Kinzu to ensure that she could protect her boss in all aspects. Kinzu was not that careful. Besides, the other party was just a courier, so he didn't take it seriously. However, looking at the large suitcases on the ground, Kinzu swallowed his saliva and asked dryly, Sir, are these all sent from China? Hearing Kinzu's voice, the middle-aged white man turned around and shrugged helplessly, Mr. Clean, these are all, and they haven't been unloaded yet. This car is full of your things. Although he didn't say it, the middle-aged white man had already complained in his heart. These Chinese are really rich. They send so many cross-border express delivery. If it was an ordinary express delivery, he would not drive all the way here, otherwise one order would not be enough for the gas. Kinzu smiled bitterly when he heard it. Did Zhu Mengyo send her own home by express delivery? After the middle-aged white man unloaded the luggage and drove away from the manor, Kinzu was still a little dazed at the things on the ground. Uncle, what is this? Is there anything delicious? Shirley brought a few little guys and trotted to Kinzu's side. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at the many boxes in front of her with some expectation. Here, Kinzu touched his nose, let's open it and have a look when we get back. I don't know if there's anything delicious. Oh. Hearing that there was nothing delicious, the little girl lost interest. After responding with disappointment, she continued to run with a few listless little guys. At this time, Eva also heard the noise and walked out of the villa. She didn't react to so many things in front of her, but said to Ween beside her, call a few people over and move the things in quickly. A few minutes later, Ween brought a few female bodyguards and carefully brought more than 20 large suitcases in front of them, as well as several exquisitely packaged packages, into the villa. Boss, where should we put these things? After entering the villa, Ween was a little embarrassed. If it were other things, she would have asked someone to throw them into the warehouse first. But now these were sent from China, so they couldn't be handled casually. Sure enough, as soon as the question came out, Kinzu didn't even hesitate, and directly ordered, "Move everything into the master bedroom first, I will sort it out myself when I have time." After agreeing, Wing led everyone to carefully put all the things into Kinzu's master bedroom. Suddenly, this surprisingly large bedroom finally didn't look so empty. After putting the things away, Kinzu sent away a few female bodyguards, sat at the head of the bed, took out his mobile phone, checked the time, and called Zumengyo directly. Chapter 629 Snowplow. When the video call was connected, Zumengyo's lazy sleeping posture suddenly appeared in front of Kinzu. Rubbing her sleepy eyes, Zumengyo yawned and asked in confusion, "What's wrong? Why are you calling so late?" Kinzu raised his wrist to check the time. It was already past 10 in the morning in the United States. In China, it should be around 11 at night. It was indeed a bit late. Kinzu smiled apologetically and said a little embarrassedly, "I didn't check the time. Did I disturb your sleep?" Zumengyo sat up against the head of the bed, tucked the quill to her chest, and said with a smile, "It's okay. I just went to bed. What's the matter? Are you in such a hurry to find me?" "No big deal." Kinzu touched his nose and explained with a smile, "It's just that the things you sent have arrived. I was just about to help you pack them and asked you how to arrange them." Zumengyo was immediately alert when she heard it and asked, "Have all the things arrived? How come so fast?" "Yes, they have all arrived." As he said that, Kinzu pointed the camera at the pile of suitcases in the room and teased, "Aren't you here to ask our hostess how to arrange these things?" "Ah? These are all mine?" To Kinzu's surprise, when Zumengyo saw the pile of suitcases in the video clearly, she was dumbfounded and couldn't close her mouth in surprise for a long time. Huh. Kinzu was also stunned by Zumengyo's question. Did the courier make a mistake? Thinking of this, he hurried to the suitcase and carefully checked it again. Well, they were all sent from Beijing, so they should be correct. After looking through them all again, Kinzu gave some doubts and fed back the results to Zumengyo. After listening to Kinzu's description, Zumengyo covered her little face with her hands and sighed speechlessly. "What's wrong?" Hearing Zumengyo sigh, Kinzu became a little nervous. Could it be that she really made a mistake? "Nothing." Zumengyo put down her hand, shook her head, and said embarrassedly, "These should be sent by my mother. I said I was going abroad and sent the things first. She said she would help me send them. It happened that I had never sent them before, so I asked her to help. Who knows?" There was no need to say the rest. Kinzu had already understood everything. It must be that Zu's mother felt sorry for her daughter and sent more things on her own initiative. Kinzu was a little nervous and asked apprehensively, "Mengyo, how did you convince your uncle and aunt to let you go abroad? Do they know about us?" After hearing Kinzu's question, Zumengyo hesitated for a moment, but still nodded. "My mother knows about us." Kinzu's heart skipped a beat, and he asked hurriedly, "Aunt knows everything. Then why didn't you tell me? I should go to meet them anyway." Zumengyo smiled indifferently and said, "Let's talk about the meeting later. Open the suitcase first and see what's inside." Kinzu wanted to say something, but he didn't know how to start. He had to run to open the suitcases one by one under Zumengyo's urging. Except for Zumengyo's bags, which were filled with her own clothes, the other suitcases were filled with daily necessities prepared by Zu's mother for Zumengyo. From toothpaste and toothbrushes to bed sheets and quilts, everything was prepared. Zumengyo also put aside other thoughts at this time, and began to direct Kinzu to put his things in place wholeheartedly. However, there were too many things, and it was past 12 o'clock. Zumengyo really couldn't stand it anymore, so she hung up that video and went to bed at Kinzu's urging. After comforting Zumengyo, Kinzu looked at the half-decorated bedroom and smiled helplessly. He couldn't understand why Zumengyo's mother knew about their affairs but didn't react at all. If it were a normal parent, knowing that their daughter had a boyfriend and even wanted to go abroad to live with him, they would definitely ask about it. But what is going on now? Shaking his head blankly, Kinzu went downstairs, but in the living room, he saw old John sitting on the sofa drinking coffee. "Boss, good morning." Seeing Kinzu coming downstairs, old John put down his coffee and greeted him with a worried face. Kinzu looked at him speechlessly. "It's noon now, okay? What's wrong?" "Old John, you don't come to my house for no reason." Old John scratched his head in confusion. He obviously didn't understand what it meant to come to my house for no reason. However, these were not important. It didn't prevent him from understanding what Kinzu meant. "Boss, the snow is a bit heavy this year. The snow on our ranch is too thick. It will take a lot of time to clean it up by manpower alone." As he said that, old John looked at Kinzu and asked tentatively, "Look, can we go and buy a snowplow? This will be more convenient." Kinzu nodded slightly after hearing this, but he didn't answer old John immediately. Instead, he leaned on the sofa, rubbed his temples tightly, and asked Eva next to him, "Eva, what do you think? Do we need to buy a snowplow?" Eva, who had just refilled old John's cup of coffee, was a little stunned after hearing this. She didn't understand why Kinzu asked for her opinion. But she reacted quickly. After thinking for a while, she nodded and said, "Clean, it is still necessary to purchase a snowplow. Our ranch is too large and there are too many places to clean up." Eva nodded slightly at old John and continued, "And if the snow in some places is not cleaned up in time, it will be dangerous if people walk on it after the snow is frozen. Uncle John is thinking about everyone." Kinzu waved his hand. "Since you think it is necessary, then I will leave it to you. You can go to Revere to purchase it in the afternoon, and you can directly withdraw the money from the ranch account." Eva nodded. She now understands that Kinzu is training her. As a ranch supervisor, these are originally the responsibilities of old John. However, Kinzu has now handed these over to her, which means that Kinzu is really training her now, instead of just helping old John as he did some time ago. Hearing Kinzu's arrangement, old John did not have any objections. Instead, he breathed a sigh of relief and showed Eva an encouraging smile. He is old now, and he really doesn't have the energy to do these things. Since the decision has been made, there is no need to hesitate. After lunch in the afternoon, Eva drove away from the ranch. Of course, she didn't go alone. She was accompanied by one of Kinzu's female bodyguards. These female bodyguards are different from the beginning. Now, except for Erica, only Kinzu can command them. Thanks to Xiaoyo2 for the reward and support. Thank you. Si estás escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a Mundo Fanfic Novelas, significa lo descarga and y subir en cines fuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo Fanfic Novelas al encontrar la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 630 Vegetable Greenhouse. In less than an hour, Eva came back with 2 small snowplows. Kinzu watched the workers unload several light yellow small snowplows from the truck, and he came over curiously. For him, who was born in the south, snow is not common. Where had he seen this stuff? After the delivery merchant left, Eva came over with a smile and introduced. "Clean, these are STJ snowplows made in Germany, each priced at $1,000. Kinzu nodded. The price was very cheap, but would such a small machine work? As if she had noticed Kinzu's confusion, Eva stepped forward and tore open the packaging of a machine, and explained with a smile. "Don't be fooled by their small size. These 2 guys are very powerful, with great suction force for lifting snow. The maximum snow lift can reach 10 to 15 meters. As she spoke, Eva opened the fuel tank of the snowplow, took a free pot of gasoline and added it in, then gently pushed the switch, and the light yellow snowplow immediately made a slight buzzing sound. While pushing the snowplow forward, Eva introduced it to Kinzu. "Clean, look, this machine can not only move automatically, but also move backwards by itself. You just need to hold it from behind." Looking at the snow column rising into the sky, Kinzu couldn't help but admire. This way of clearing snow is indeed much more efficient. Eva smiled and agreed. Yes, the efficiency can indeed be greatly improved. Kinzu looked at it and saw that Eva had bought a total of 5 snowplows this time, so he said, "In this case, let's send the remaining ones to old John and the others, and we will keep this one for ourselves, which will be more convenient." The arrival of the snowplow also made the cowboys feel relieved. There was no way, the snow was too heavy and the snow was too thick. And the efficiency of manual snow shoveling was too low. If the areas that needed to be cleared were not cleared by night, it would be difficult to work tomorrow morning. Sitting under the porch in front of the villa, Kinzu sipped a cup of hot tea, his eyes unconsciously swept across the snow-covered pasture outside, feeling very satisfied. Chenmu just called again. The restaurant's business has been very hot recently. It can be said that it has reached the point where you have to queue up for several days to eat. And the location of the restaurant is basically booked out for next week. As for the reason for the hot business of the restaurant, Chenmu didn't quite understand, but he was also very sure that it was definitely related to the ingredients provided by the manor. Because the vegetables are consumed every day, and steaks and other things are selling very well. Even the newly arrived lobsters and king crabs are quickly consumed. Chen Mu's suggestion is that if there is no problem with the supply of ingredients, you can consider opening a new store. It doesn't matter whether it is a chain or a single store, but it must be opened. Because this feeling of pushing customers out every day is really uncomfortable. After listening to Chen Mu's suggestion, Qin not only began to ponder. Is there a problem with the supply of ingredients? The supply of beef is basically no problem. Apart from other things, there are still dozens of tons of beef in the Boston cold storage. As for vegetables, Qin turned his head to look at the vegetable field. It seems that there is a problem. He now has 6 acres of vegetable fields, and there are not many vegetables left. The supply of 100 kilograms a day can still be sufficient. If it increases, it will be a big problem. Touching his nose, Qin sighed. It seems that the vegetable field needs to be expanded. Moreover, it can't be left in the open air. Qin looked at the vegetable field covered with a layer of white snow not far away and frowned slightly. With such heavy snow, the seedlings in the vegetable field may be crushed to death even if they are not frozen to death. In addition, when he was planting vegetables, there were not so many people in the ranch and no one paid attention to this place. But now, if he opens a few quick-growing vegetable fields, it is estimated that people will find something unusual. However, if a greenhouse is built, it will not matter. Outsiders will definitely not be able to enter his greenhouse. When the time comes, he just needs to have people pick the vegetables and send them out on time. Moreover, with the greenhouse, he can grow vegetables of all seasons without restraint. The more he thought about it, the more excited Qin became, and the more he felt that this method was feasible. He took out his mobile phone, searched for a few times, and then called Once directly. After receiving Qin's call, Once, who was working in the company, was a little nervous. He had completed the project, so why did this big customer come to him again? Is there something he is not satisfied with? Thinking of this, Once felt a little weak in his heart. Although he was confident in his project, he could not withstand the many natural disasters. After hesitating for a moment, Once carefully picked up the phone and said in a slightly flattering voice, "Hello, Mr. Qin." "Yeah," Qin agreed lightly, without saying any more nonsense. He asked straight to the point, "Once, does your company have business related to vegetable greenhouses?" "Vegetable greenhouses?" Once was stunned when he heard this, and then hurriedly said, "Mr. Qin, yes, our company can make vegetable greenhouses of various types and materials. I wonder which one you need." Qin thought about it and didn't need a vegetable greenhouse of much use, so he said, "The ordinary type will be fine. Tell me first, how much does it cost to build one of this kind?" Once coughed twice. It seemed that there was something wrong with his introduction. So he organized his words a little and continued to explain, "Mr. Qin, it's like this. Currently, there are 2 types of vegetable greenhouses, one is a bamboo structure, and the other is a steel structure." Hearing the embarrassed voice of Once on the phone, Qin touched his nose and asked, "Once, then tell me the difference between the 2 first." Once breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly introduced, "Mr. Qin, it's like this, a bamboo structure vegetable greenhouse. It uses bamboo poles and wood as arch frame materials. The advantages are easy to obtain materials, convenient construction and low cost. The disadvantages are also obvious, that is, the arch frame strength is too low, and the ability to resist wind and snow is poor. A heavy snowfall can collapse it, and it needs to be repaired and replaced every year, which is not very convenient to manage." Qin frowned when he heard this. This won't do. With the weather in Boston, it is estimated that his vegetable greenhouse will be scrapped just after it is installed. Once didn't hear Qin's voice, so he knew that Qin was definitely not interested in this, so he continued, "Mr. Qin, the other one is the assembled galvanized steel pipe greenhouse, which uses hot-dip galvanized thin-walled steel pipe as the arch frame material. The advantages are high strength, strong resistance to wind and snow, good anti-corrosion performance, high light transmittance, more convenient management, and a service life of up to 10 to 15 years. The disadvantage is that the cost is too high and the one-time investment is large." Chapter 631. Build 21st. After listening to Once's introduction, Qin didn't even hesitate, and asked directly, "How much is the construction price of the steel structure?" Once also gave his own quotation very straightforwardly, $15,000 per acre. Qin raised his eyebrows. This price was a bit beyond his expectations. He originally thought that building a vegetable greenhouse would cost at least tens of thousands of dollars, but he didn't expect that he could build one for $15,000. Okay, then send someone over as soon as possible, the sooner the better. After hanging up the phone, Kinzu sipped his tea with satisfaction, and then he found that the tea was cold. Putting down the teacup, Kinzu lay back in the chair, but his mind was thinking again. Now the supply of vegetables is solved, what about seafood? The raw materials of a restaurant are nothing more than meat, vegetables, and seafood. Now that beef and vegetables have relatively stable channels, the next consideration is seafood. Although he has a fishery, the fish in the fishery are basically some common edible fish. For example, cod, herring and the like. Although they are also very good, compared with those rare fish species, they are naturally much worse. However, even if we want to breed some other fish species now, the time is not right. It is winter now. If we put the fry into the sea, let alone being targeted by those ferocious predators, what kind of experience is it? The cold seawater alone can solve the problem of 3 layers of fry. But if we go out to sea to fish, we may not be able to catch the right fish, right? The more Kinzu thought about it, the more headache he felt. If the seafood supply is not handled properly, Chenmu's plan to open a store will probably be aborted. Sighing, Kinzu stood up, stretched, and walked towards the vegetable field. Eat one bite at a time, and walk one step at a time. The first thing he has to do now is to choose a suitable location for his vegetable base. Stepping on the creaking snow, Kinzu walked around the vegetable field for a long time and finally determined the location of his vegetable greenhouse in the future. In fact, there is nothing good to choose. It can be lined up along the woods on the edge of the vegetable field, extending all the way to the depths of the pasture. Kinzu's initial plan was to build 20 vegetable greenhouses. For him, 1 or 2 was really meaningless. He would build them all at once. Even if the plan failed, he would not care. It was not much money anyway. Yes, for the wealthy Keen landlord, $300,000 was not a lot of money. Just when Kinzu had just found a location, Ons came to him in a hurry with a handsome young white man. Mr. Clean, this is our company's top designer who specializes in vegetable greenhouse design, Sean Warner. Pointing to the 25 or 26-year-old white man next to him, Ons introduced him to Kinzu enthusiastically. Kinzu smiled slightly, took the initiative to extend his hand, and said politely, "Welcome, Mr. Sean, I'm sorry to trouble you to pay more attention to this matter. Mr. Clean, you are too polite. This is what I should do." Sean seemed to be not used to dealing with people. After shaking hands with Kinzu awkwardly, he asked directly, "Mr. Clean, I wonder where your vegetable greenhouse is going to be built? Can you show us the place?" Kinzu didn't mind. He pointed to a large area in front of him and said with a smile, "It's here. Starting from this side, it extends all the way to that side. I plan to build 20 vegetable greenhouses." Ons and the other 2 didn't feel anything after hearing this, but Eva followed behind and was surprised again. 20 vegetable greenhouses? What does Kinzu want to do? Switch to selling vegetables? After Ons took Sean to see the place, Eva stepped forward and asked carefully, "Clean, you want so many vegetable greenhouses, how can you manage them?" She didn't ask Kinzu what he was going to do, nor did she plan to ask Kinzu what he thought, but considered this problem from a realistic perspective. It's built, but what about the subsequent management? Kinzu didn't think too much about it. After hearing Eva's question, he smiled and said, "It's not that simple. Let the bodyguards take care of it and take time to check each one." Eva was silent. She put those female bodyguards behind her. It's not her fault. Since the bodyguards moved to the cowboy apartment, they rarely appeared in the villa together. After casually surveying the ground conditions, Ons hurried back with Sean and promised Kinzu that they could start work tomorrow. Kinzu was really satisfied with Ons' high efficiency. It was worthy at being a company introduced by the system. It was reliable. In the evening, when Kinzu had a video call with his sister at home, he also talked about this matter. Kinwan didn't have any objection to her brother opening a store. Instead, she supported it with all her strength. They all saw the speed at which the restaurant made money. Because their restaurant had only been open for a few days, it made a few $100,000. After saying this, Kinwan said with a worried look on her face, "Xiaozu, when will you send some more beef back? After eating your beef, we don't want to eat other meats anymore. What should we do?" Kinzu almost vomited blood after hearing this. At first, when he saw Kinwan's face was not good, he thought someone had offended her, who knew it was just for such a small matter. Kinzu smiled bitterly and said, "Okay, sister, I know about this." Just as he was about to hang up that video, Kinzu suddenly remembered something, so he said, "By the way, sister, I sent you some stonefish back. Please pay attention to receive the goods when the time comes." Stonefish? Kinwan was a little stunned when she heard it. What kind of fish is this? It's a very ugly fish. Kinzu gestured to explain to his sister, but after gesturing for a long time, he didn't know how to explain. "Forget it, go to bed. Anyway, it's a very precious fish. Let the chef decide the price." Kinwan nodded after hearing this. After hanging up that video, she looked at her husband who had just come in and asked, "By the way, do you know stonefish?" "Yes, what's the matter?" Li Jianhua looked at his wife with some confusion, wondering why she suddenly asked this. "How do you know all this?" Kinwan muttered a little depressed, took out a mobile phone, and searched for information on the internet while saying, "Xiao Zhu said that he sent us a batch of stonefish and asked us to pay attention to receive them." "Really?" Li Jianhua shouted in surprise and asked hurriedly, "How did he transport it here? Is it frozen?" Kinwan didn't even raise her head and said, "How should I know? I guess he can't send it alive, right?" Li Jianhua thought about it and couldn't help but sigh with disappointment. How can frozen fish taste as good as live ones? Chapter 632 Vegetable Seeds. The efficiency of ants was faster than Kinzu had imagined. The next morning, when he was still lying in bed and didn't want to get up, Eva came to report that they had already started working. Kinzu was speechless, and smiled and said, "With such high efficiency, it seems that they should be given a bonus." Eva nodded in agreement and sighed. "To be honest, I have never seen such a dedicated construction company." However, just halfway through her words, her whole body was unstable and she fell on the bed. "Clean, what are you going to do?" Eva was startled and looked at Kinzu with a little uneven breath. With a smile, Kinzu did not answer, but proved what he wanted to do with his actual actions. The clouds cleared and the rain stopped. Lying in Kinzu's arms, Eva said lazily, "It's early in the morning, you are not afraid of others seeing it." Kinzu lay on the bed contentedly, with a faint smile on his face, looking very proud. Kinzu had been holding back his anger since the little girl came back to sleep. This time he found a chance to vent it, and he felt a lot more relaxed. After getting up and washing up, Kinzu walked out of the villa. The first thing he saw was Shirley running with a few little guys. Seeing Kinzu coming out, Daha's eyes lit up, and he wagged his tail and wanted to come over. "Daha, come back quickly, or you won't have any food today." The little girl glanced at Daha who wanted to slack off, and she stopped, put her hands on her hips and shouted. After being yelled at by the little girl, Daha immediately lowered his head, stopped wagging his tail, and returned to the middle of the team listlessly. The remaining three little guys, including Xiaohe, all made mocking whimpers, as if they were despising the guy who wanted to slack off. While playing and fighting, the little guys started their morning run again. Watching the little guys go away, Kinzu's eyes inadvertently glanced at the swimming pool, and he also thought of his other general, Xuanwu. "I don't know where this guy went crazy." Kinzu curled his lips, tightened his scarf, and walked towards the vegetable field. People say that it's not cold when it snows, but when the snow melts, it's cold. This is not without reason. Now Kinzu feels that today is really much colder than yesterday. Fortunately, the snow in front of and behind that door has been swept away, and there is no obstacle to walking. But this is different for the workers who came to the construction. They came early in the morning, and the cold in the morning is also the heaviest. The snow on the ground has already turned into ice chips. If they hadn't anticipated it and brought a special ice-breaking machine, they might have returned empty-handed today. When Kinzu arrived at the vegetable field, he heard a rumbling sound. A tractor-like machine was pushing away a small layer of snow and soil on the ground. He pointed with his finger at something that seemed to be a modified tractor. He glanced at Ons who was leaning over to the side and asked in confusion, "What is this? A snowplow?" Hearing this, Ons hurriedly exclaimed, "Clean, although this is not a snowplow, it's almost the same. This is specially used to break ice." Kinzu looked at it curiously. Not only did he feel his hands itching, he said to Ons, "Is this car easy to drive? Is it easy to operate?" Ons was stunned when he heard this, but seeing Kinzu's excitement, he hurriedly said, "Easy, this car is very easy to operate." Then, Ons tentatively asked, "Mr. Clean, do you want to go up and try it?" Although Ons only asked tentatively, Kinzu nodded and agreed without any hesitation. Seeing this, Ont waved at the people on the icebreaker, and when he stopped the car to smoke, he said, "Mr. Clean, if you want to try, you can go up. This gentleman will fully cooperate with you." Kinzu waved his hand. "Does he need to be taught? It's a joke. How can he be a driver for many years in vain?" Pulling the handle, Kinzu gently exerted force and went directly to the cab. With a gentle push of the handle, the light yellow icebreaker began to work again. Seeing Kinzu driving the icebreaker in a proper manner, Ernst next to him breathed a sigh of relief. With the help of the icebreaker, Ernst's progress was very fast. In just one morning, the ground at the 20 vegetable greenhouses was all leveled. They only had to wait for the materials to arrive in the afternoon to start building. Lunch was made by Kinzu. The workers were taken to the cafeteria by Suzy, while Ons and Sean were left by Kinzu to eat together. At the dinner table, Kinzu asked again, "Ernst, how long would it take you to finish the work?" Putting down his knife and fork, Ons thought carefully, and then said in a deep voice, "At the fastest, it will be completed in 2 days." Kinzu calculated in his mind. 2 days is already very fast. It seems that he can go and get some seeds. After making up his mind, Kinzu had lunch and drove out with Erica. The main reason why he didn't bring Dale and Diva was that Kinzu still felt that Erica, who had taken the spiritual liquid, should be more obedient. Vegetable seeds are different from watergrass seeds. After Kinzu arrived in Revere, he remembered that he didn't know where to buy them. The last time he bought vegetable seeds, he brought them from his hometown. He had never bought vegetable seeds here. After wandering around unconsciously for a while, he happened to pass by a bar. Kinzu looked up and saw that it was the twilight where he had been when he recruited cowboys. "Stop here," Kinzu told Erica, and when the car stopped, he pushed the door and got out. Erica didn't ask anything. When she saw Kinzu get out of the car, she got out of the car and stood beside Kinzu. After standing at the door and looking around for a while, the twilight pattern did not change. This might be because it was not open yet. The neon lights that made people feel intoxicated and dreamy were not turned on, so it looked a little plain and elegant. Without much hesitation, Kinzu took Erica and walked into the bar. Maybe old Hank could give him a satisfactory answer. After entering the bar, a black guy who was cleaning was about to subconsciously say that the place was not open yet, but he saw who was coming at a glance. "Oh, Mr. Clean, you're here, please come in." The black guy grinned and hurriedly invited Kinzu in. They all knew Kinzu and knew that he knew the bar owner old Hank, so they generally would not stop him. Hearing the voice, old Hank also raised his head from behind the bar, smiled as Kinzu walked in, and said jokingly, "Why is our landlord Keen here? Are you willing to give up your ranch?" Chapter 633 Online Seed Store. Kinzu came to the bar, sat down on the high stool, knocked his hands on the old bar, and said with a smile, "Why don't you bring the beer? Didn't you see the guests come in?" Old Hank slowly put down the cocktail shaker he was wiping, and said with a smile, "Oh, my respected guest, don't you know that this place is not open yet?" Having said that, old Hank turned around and took 2 glasses of draft beer from the back and placed them in front of Kinzu and Erica. Erica waved her hand and smiled and declined. "I still have to drive, so I won't drink." Old Hank smiled in understanding, and didn't say anything, but turned to look at Kinzu next to him and said, "Clean, I haven't seen you for a while. I heard that you bought another Western restaurant." Kinzu was stunned and subconsciously asked, "Old Hank, how did you know this?" Logically speaking, he bought an industry in Boston, and it was introduced by an acquaintance, so the news would not be spread at all. Old Hank picked up his cocktail shaker and continued to wipe it. With a smile on his face, he said, "I heard from Joseph that he has to come to the bar every day to have a couple of drinks. I heard him mention it when we were chatting." Although old Hank's expression was very calm, in his heart, he was very curious about this billionaire from China. For no other reason, it was because when the environment of the ranch was not very good, he dared to spend more than $200 million to acquire a ranch. Of course, except for those capitalists who really paid attention, ordinary people thought that Kinzu bought it with cash. Therefore, for Kinzu, the billionaire from China, many people envy him, but they might as well hold a mentality of watching a joke. The cost of opening a ranch here is not low. If you don't do it well and lose all the money, it will be a big joke. And now, when people are still waiting to see his ranch fail, he turns around and buys a Michelin 3-star restaurant. This surprised old Hank, which meant that the net worth of the billionaire in front of him was definitely higher than those people imagined. Kinzu ignored the surprise in old Hank's eyes. When he heard that it was Joseph who said it, he felt relieved but also a little confused. Joseph. Is he in Revere now? Old Hank came back to his senses from his contemplation, shook his head, and said with a smile, "Of course, he is now taking the government compensation and wandering around Revere every day. I wonder how many people envy him." Kinzu laughed dumbly. What is there to envy about this? A typhoon destroyed the home he had lived for half his life. Is this something to envy? But on second thought, although the home was destroyed, he didn't suffer much loss. At most, he had a few good horses, but they were all insured. So Joseph is now taking the compensation and insurance money, waiting for the typhoon to pass so that he can rebuild his home. After chatting for a while, Kinzu almost finished his glass of draft beer, and then he asked, "Old Hank, do you know where to buy vegetable seeds nearby? I want to open a small vegetable garden in the ranch." Vegetable seeds? Old Hank looked at Kinzu in surprise. Isn't it said that Chinese people are very rich? Why does a billionaire want to grow his own vegetables? As if knowing what Old Hank was thinking, Kinzu explained with a wry smile, "I just think that the vegetables I grow are fresher." "Oh, so?" Old Hank nodded suddenly and said with a smile, "However, you should not be able to buy seeds in Revere at this time. Only in the spring will the store put vegetable seeds on the shelves, and they will be removed in the summer. It seems that we can only talk about it next spring." Kinzu sighed with some disappointment. He also expected this result. After all, it is not the season for sowing. Except for those professional seed sellers, other sales outlets cannot sell them all year round. Just when he was disappointed, he heard a slightly nervous male voice next to him. "Mr. Clean, you want to buy seeds, right?" Kinzu turned around after hearing that. The black guy who was cleaning just now was looking at him nervously. Nodding subconsciously, Kinzu asked expectantly, "Yes, do you know where to buy them?" The black guy nodded slightly, and was about to say something when he was startled by Kinzu. Kinzu, who was just sitting on a high stool, jumped down, grabbed the black guy's hand, and dragged him outside. Kinzu was really excited now. He didn't want to delay that plan to open a store again because of the lack of vegetable supply. At this time, hearing that the black guy knew where to sell seeds, Kinzu couldn't control his mood anymore. He got up and pulled him outside. What does it mean to be sent a pillow when you are sleepy? If you ask others, the answers may be different, but if you ask Kinzu now, he will tell you that it is the same feeling as he is now. Hey, Mr. Clean, wait a minute." After a moment of shock, the black guy came to his senses and quickly dissuaded the somewhat excited Kinzu, saying, "Mr. Clean, the few stores I know do not have physical stores, but sell seeds online." "Ah? Online?" Kinzu's body stiffened when he heard it, feeling that he seemed to have overlooked something. The black guy nodded and explained, "Mr. Clean, there are many online seed stores now, such as Burpa, Johnny's Seeds and Totally Tomatoes. These stores not only have local American vegetables, but also some Chinese vegetable seeds, such as lettuce, tomatoes, Chinese cucumbers and Chinese eggplants." After listening to the black guy's introduction, Kinzu wanted to slap himself twice. He was a top student, but how could he not even be as good as a bartender? What is not sold online now? Why didn't he think of searching online? The more he thought about it, the more ashamed Kinzu felt, and his face turned red. Looking up at the black guy who was staring at him nervously, Kinzu took out his wallet and handed over a few francs. "Thank you so much today. This is a little gift, not a respect." After saying that, he didn't give him a chance to refuse. He drank the beer in Erica's glass in one breath, then said hello to Old Hank and left the bar in a hurry. Old Hank kept watching Kinzu leave, and when Kinzu's figure completely disappeared, he slowly wiped his cocktail shaker. After a while, he saw the black guy next to him still standing there stupidly, and couldn't help urging him, "Okay, Ika, hurry up and do your own thing, the guest should be here soon." Chapter 634 Out of stock? After leaving the bar, Kinzu did not stop in Rivero, and directly asked Erica to drive back to the ranch. Arriving at the villa, Kinzu ignored Eva's surprised eyes and went upstairs without stopping and went into his bedroom. "Hey, Erica, where did you go? What happened to Clean?" Watching Kinzu disappear at the corner of the stairs, Eva looked at Erica who followed in with some curiosity. Hearing the question, Erica shrugged helplessly, showing a confused expression, and said, "I don't know, I just went to the bar for a while, and then came back." Without mentioning Eva's doubts, Kinzu returned to the room, turned on his computer, and then followed the website given by the black guy and went directly to a store called Totally Tomatoes. After walking around the store for a few times, Kinzu showed a satisfied smile on his face. The things here are really not ordinary. Not only are there vegetable seeds from the United States, but also some vegetables from China, and there are also some melon and fruit seeds. After looking around for a long time, Kinzu bought everything that was available in the store. Of course, Kinzu bought more of the commonly used ones, and also bought a lot of those that were not often used, such as spices. Although these things are not commonly used by foreigners here, Kinzu still plans to pick out a greenhouse to grow them. If nothing else, it is good to eat them yourself. After choosing online, Kinzu began to place orders according to the instructions, fill in the address, pay, and then just wait for delivery. It must be said that the internet has really made people's lives a lot simpler. After turning off the computer and going downstairs, Kinzu realized that the living room was empty. Where are the people? Where did they go? Curiously walking out of the villa, the laughter outside immediately reached his ears. Ha ha, uncle, save me, Aunt Eva bullied me. Before he could come to his senses, Shirley ran over, hiding behind him with a few little guys, making faces at Eva not far away. What are you doing? Looking at the snowflakes scattered on them, Kinzu couldn't help but be speechless. How old are you, and you are still playing snowballs? Just when he wanted to say something, he turned around and felt a ball of white objects explode in front of him. Clean, be careful. Woof woof woof, oh my god, he exclaimed. It was too late to dodge. Kinzu could only watch a ball of snowflakes fall on him. Ha ha, look, you didn't dodge either. Eva hugged her arms and watched the two of them with great joy not far away. She was just attacked by the little girl just now. Little girl, it seems that you really deserve to be punished. Kinzu was a little stunned, shook off the snowflakes on his body, stretched out his hand to grab a ball of white snow on the grass, and shouted as if to throw it at Shirley. Ah, giggle, help me. The little girl screamed in fear, giggled and raised her legs to run into the villa, and Daha and Xiaohe, who were watching the excitement next to her, also ran happily. But before they had taken 2 steps, the little guys found that the leader was gone. Turning back, they saw the little girl being picked up by Kinzu and held in his arms. Now, the little guys ran even more happily. Seeing that the big guys had left her and ran away, the little girl's eyes rolled around, and she immediately pretended to be pitiful and began to beg for mercy. Uncle, I didn't mean it, really. Didn't mean it. Kinzu looked at her with suspicion. Yeah, Shirley didn't mean it. Seeing that her uncle seemed to believe her, the little girl nodded quickly to indicate that what she said was true. Naughty little thing, I'd be surprised if I believed you. After kissing the little girl's red face from the cold, Kinzu held the little girl and walked into the villa with a smile. Don't play in the snow. What if you get frozen? No, snow is fun. Seeing that Kinzu didn't come to her to settle the score, the little girl breathed a sigh of relief and patted her chest, looking like she was still frightened. It's fun. Are you cold? Kinzu pinched her nose with his hand and asked with a smile. The little girl shrank her head subconsciously when the cold hand touched her nose, and muttered in dissatisfaction. Uncle is bad, it's so cold. He smiled bitterly, carried the little girl back to the villa, shook off the snow on his body at the door, and then walked in. Uncle, I want to go out. The snow is still outside. As soon as she sat down on the sofa, the little girl swung her legs and looked at Kinzu expectantly. Okay, take a break. It's windy outside now, not suitable for riding. Ignoring the little girl's request, Kinzu picked up his mobile phone and looked at it. Sure enough, he missed the call. When he entered the door just now, he heard the phone ringing, but he didn't have time to answer it. The call came from a local unfamiliar number. Kinzu hesitated for a moment, and just as he was about to call back, he saw the phone flash and the phone rang again. Hello, is this Mr. Keen from Tycoon Manor? A very unfamiliar baritone came from the other end of the phone. I'm Kinzu, who are you? Kinzu looked at the number again with some doubts, and he really didn't know it. While he was wondering, he heard the baritone on the other end of the phone continue. It's like this, Mr. Clean, are you ordering some vegetable seeds just now? Yes, what's wrong? Kinzu was even more confused. Could it be the owner? As it turned out, Kinzu's guess was right. The person who called him was the owner of Totally Tomatoes, Bill Waters. For Bill today, it can be said that he was both excited and a little sad. Excited because just now, his online store received a large order, enough for him to sell for several months. And sad, some of the unpopular ones, such as celery and butter, are out of stock. It's not his fault. Those unpopular ones that few people eat have never been sold since they were put on the shelves. And those things take up a lot of space at home, so when he had a garage sale last time, someone happened to like them, so he simply packed them up and sold them to his neighbor. But who would have thought that just as he finished dealing with the things here, the online store over there received an order, and the quantity was not small. This made him a little embarrassed. He had no choice but to call and hope that the customer could understand. Kinzu was a little depressed when he heard Bill say that some seeds were out of stock. He quickly returned to the bedroom, turned on the computer, and compared the order to ask which kinds they were. When Bill reported them one by one, Kinzu became even more depressed. The out-of-stock ones are basically some vegetable seeds used to make spices, and they are all Chinese specialties. Chapter 635a. Sudden phone call. Noticing that Kinzu was silent, Bill coughed twice and apologized. Mr. Clean, I'm very sorry about this. I forgot to take these off the shelves. I apologize for the trouble I caused you. Forget it, if there is no seed, then there is no seed. Kinzu sighed and didn't dwell on it. There was no point in dwelling on it. It was impossible for others to make it for you. Thank you, Mr. Clean, thank you very much for your understanding. Bill breathed a sigh of relief. You know, the most feared thing for online shop owners is bad reviews. If you don't do it well, and get a bad review for such a small matter, it would be a disaster. After being relieved, Bill patted his chest and promised, Mr. Clean, I will refund you in a while, and the seeds will be delivered to you in the afternoon. Oh? Kinzu asked in surprise. So fast? In the afternoon? Bill smiled slightly and said, Yes, Mr. Clean, I will personally deliver it to you in the afternoon. Kinzu was a little embarrassed now. He was out of stock and asked the store owner to run there in person. However, he also wanted to get the seeds as soon as possible, so he said, In that case, I'll trouble you, Mr. Bill. It doesn't matter, these are what I should do, and I have to thank Mr. Clean. Bill smiled indifferently. Kinzu didn't say anything else. After hanging up the phone, he still shook his head helplessly. He saw that he could only go back and get some next time. Although it is strictly forbidden to bring seeds to the customs, for Kinzu with a backpack, even if he brought a ton, it would be easy. Bill's words were still very trustworthy. Less than 2 minutes after hanging up the phone, the money had been returned. Moreover, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he drove the seeds to the ranch in person. When Kinzu received Bill's call, he was under the pergola with the white tiger basking in the sun. After pointing the way to Bill and asking him to drive in directly, Kinzu hung up the phone, put down the teacup in his hand, stood up, and went out to greet him. Uncle, wait for me. Seeing Kinzu was about to leave, Shirley hurriedly called out from behind, and at the same time said to the pony under her crotch, hurry up, catch up with Uncle, otherwise I won't give you dinner. The pony, which was originally leisurely and carrying the little girl everywhere, immediately became anxious after hearing the words, and ran after Kinzu, and couldn't help but wailing in his heart. Is this the legendary landlord? After waiting for less than 2 minutes, a silver grey Dodge pickup truck came to the door of the villa along the cleared ranch owner's road. The car door opened, and a middle-aged white man in a black down jacket walked down with a smile on his face. It was really cold just after getting off the car. Bill couldn't help but wrap up his down jacket, looking at the group walking towards him with a strange look in his eyes. 1 man, 2 women, and a little girl, is this a family? However, time did not allow him to think too much. In the blink of an eye, Kinzu had already arrived in front of him. Bill had to suppress his curiosity and asked hurriedly, Excuse me, is this Mr. Clean? Kinzu nodded, smiled and stretched out his hand, saying, I am Kinzu. Mr. Bill, thank you for your hard work and trouble you to come here in person. Shaking hands with Kinzu, Bill smiled and said, Mr. Keen is too polite. I should be the one to apologize for this. Come and see, the remaining seats are all here. As he said that, Bill came to the back of the pickup truck, climbed up with a flip, and began to unload bags from the top. Seeing this, Ween also stepped forward to help Bill unload. In the blink of an eye, several large bags of vegetable seeds on the back pocket of the pickup truck were all unloaded. Bill looked at Ween in surprise. He didn't expect that this woman with a good appearance and a hot body was actually very strong. She was not more difficult than him to lift things. Well, Bill firmly refused to admit that the woman was actually better than him. After sending Bill, who looked surprised and puzzled, away, Kinzu took Ween and I to get all the seeds to the warehouse. He also wanted to give these seeds a bath. This time, Qinzhou spent more than $10,000 just to buy seeds for the 20 greenhouses. Although many vegetable seeds are relatively cheap, some seeds are also very expensive. There is nothing he can do about it. It is okay in China. If he returns to China, the price of these foreign seeds will be even more expensive. After working in the warehouse for more than 2 hours, Qinzhou finally gave all the seeds a bath. When he came out, it was a little dark. "Uncle, where have you been? I can't find you." As soon as he returned to the door of the villa, the little girl rushed over on a pony, her little face full of grievances. "What's wrong? Who made our little princess angry?" Qinzhou was a little dazed, and quickly picked up the little girl, holding her in his arms and rocking her gently. "Mom just called and said she's sick. I want to go back to see her." The little girl's eyes were a little red. She lay on Qinzhou's shoulder and her voice was choked. "Is Christine sick?" Qinzhou hurriedly wanted to take out his mobile phone, but he couldn't find it after feeling around. At this moment, Eva came out with his mobile phone, looked at the little girl with some concern, and then said, "You didn't bring your mobile phone. Christine called just now, and I answered it for you." Qinzhou reached out to take the phone, not paying attention to it. While dialing, he asked, "What's going on? Is Christine really sick?" Eva nodded gently. This is what she said. She said she missed Shirley and asked if you could send the little girl back. After speaking, she looked at the little girl and said helplessly, "She was just talking on the phone." Who knew that the little girl was right next to her and she happened to hear it? Qinzhou was relieved. He said that even if Christine was really sick, she shouldn't let the little girl know. Just as he was thinking, the phone was picked up, and Christine's somewhat hoarse voice came over. "Clean, is that you?" Qinzhou handed the little girl to Weaver, and walked aside, then said, "It's me, what's wrong with you? Is your voice like this?" Christine smiled gently and comforted. "I'm fine, I just miss Shirley a little. You took her away for so long and didn't send her back to me." Qinzhou frowned slightly, wanting to ask something, but held back. Some things, if people don't want to say, it's useless to ask more. So he sighed and said, "Okay, where are you now?" "I'll be there right away." "Ah?" Christine was a little surprised, and hurriedly persuaded with a hoarse voice, "It's too late now, come over tomorrow." Qinzhou looked back at the little girl whose tears were already overflowing from her eyes, and smiled bigly. "If you don't go quickly, your baby probably won't be able to sleep tonight." Chapter 636 I Won't Give In. After asking for the specific address, Qinzhou hung up the phone, turned around, picked up the little girl, and comforted her. "Shirley, be good, Uncle will take you to see your mother now, don't cry." It would have been better if he didn't say anything. As soon as Qinzhou said it, it was as if the floodgates were opened, and the little girl burst into tears, crying so hard that it was heartbreaking. Qinzhou, who originally thought it was nothing, now felt his nose sour. "Eva, quickly ask Dale to prepare the car, I want to go to New York." Eva heard this, looked at the sky, and suggested, "Clean, it's so late today, why don't you go tomorrow morning?" Qinzhou waved his hand, looked at the little girl in his arms helplessly, and said, "Hurry up, this girl can't wait until tomorrow." Less than 5 minutes later, Dale drove the Cadillac out and parked it at the door of the villa. Qinzhou only brought some food for the trip, nothing else. He opened the back door, put the little girl in first, and then got in himself. After helping the little girl fasten her seatbelt, Dale started the car and asked without looking back, "Boss, where are we going?" "Columbia and Cornell Presbyterian Hospital in New York." New York Hospital was established in 1771 and is an affiliated hospital of Cornell University Medical College. Presbyterian Hospital was established in 1868 and is an affiliated hospital of Columbia University Medical College. On January 1, 1998, New York Hospital and Presbyterian Hospital officially merged to form New York Presbyterian Hospital, becoming the largest and most comprehensive hospital in New York State. Both hospitals had a long history before the merger and enjoyed a high reputation in the New York metropolitan area. When Qinzhou arrived at the hospital, it was already past 8 o'clock in the evening. Except for the necessary staff who stayed behind, most of the doctors had already left work. After asking a few guards who stayed behind, Qinzhou entered all the way inside and came directly to the inpatient department. When he saw Christine lying on the bed, he couldn't believe his eyes. "Chris, what happened to you?" Qinzhou walked into the ward with Shirley in his arms, somewhat excited. The ward was a single bed, and the decoration was also quite luxurious. In the middle of the ward, there was a bed near the window. And at this moment, on this bed, half lying was a woman with a thin face that made people feel distressed. Christine looked at Qinzu, who came in, and forced a smile, and whispered, "You are here." Qinzu nodded, and was about to say something, but was interrupted by the movement in his arms. As soon as the little girl entered the room, before Qinzu could react, she slipped down, ran to the side of the bed on tiptoe, and asked with a sob, "Mom, what's wrong with you? Are you sick?" Christine gently stroked the little girl's head, and a hint of surprise flashed on her thin face. "Mom is thinking about my little Shirley. Does Shirley miss Mom?" The little girl nodded her head and looked at Christine with tears in her eyes. "Shirley misses Mom too. Shirley is with Mom, so she won't go." "Good girl." Christine was moved and hugged Shirley. Her beautiful eyes, which were still moving, kept looking at Qinzu, which contained gratitude and joy. Qinzu walked into the ward and did not disturb the two of them. Instead, he sat down and watched them quietly. After a long time, when the two of them calmed down a little, Qinzu asked, "Tell me, what's going on?" Christine opened her mouth and was about to say something, but the door of the ward was pushed open again. "Gary, the porridge is here. Eat some while it's hot." Cargill hurried in with a plastic bag. However, as soon as the doors opened, 5 or 6 pairs of eyes looked over, which made her a little scared. "Who are you?" Cargill looked at Erica and Dale, who were blocking the door, and asked with a vigilant face. "Cargill, don't be nervous, they are my friends." Christine waved at Cargill on the bed. Hearing Christine's voice, Cargill came back to his senses and saw Qinzu sitting beside the bed. "Is it you?" Cargill's eyes suddenly became a little unfriendly. Qinzu touched his nose. He didn't understand why this big foreign horse had such a big prejudice against him. However, turning his head to look at Christine on the bed, thinking of her hobbies, Qinzu seemed to have a little understanding in his heart. "Cargill, bring the things over quickly, I'm starving." Seeing that the atmosphere in the room was a little weird, Christine hurriedly called Cargill and asked her to bring the things over. Hearing Christine's voice, Cargill retracted his gaze and looked at Christine on the bed, and said with some heartache, "Christine, don't move around, come and let me help you." As he said, Cargill came to the bed, helped Christine up, and began to feed her porridge. Qinzu watched from the side without saying anything. When Christine finished eating the porridge, he asked, "Chris, you haven't told me yet, what's going on?" It would have been better if he didn't ask. After asking, Christine was fine, but Cargill couldn't hold it back and burst into tears. "Don't cry, I'm fine, right?" Christine raised her hand to help Cargill wipe her tears, and then said, "Go to the nearby hotel to help them get a few rooms, we will go home tomorrow." Cargill was about to refute, but Christine stopped him and said softly, "Go first." Staring at Christine for a long time, Cargill nodded, picked up the bag beside him, stood up and walked out. Qinzu looked at her, but didn't stop her. Instead, he winked at Dale and Erica and asked them to wait outside. Dale wanted to take the little girl out with her, but the little girl grabbed the bed sheet and refused to move. Qinzu had no choice but to signal them to go out first. After everyone left, only the little girl lying on the head of the bed and Christine leaning against the bed were left in the ward. After hesitating for a moment, Qinzu walked forward, sat in the position where Cargill had just sat, and gently hugged Christine in his arms. "There's no one here now, tell me, what's going on?" Pursing her lips, Christine raised her head, looked at Qinzu with burning eyes, and asked instead of answering, "Clean, am I beautiful?" Qinzu was stunned, and nodded decisively, "Of course you were beautiful." Christine's beautiful eyes stared straight into Qinzu's eyes, without blinking, as if she wanted to see through this man. After a long time, Christine retracted her gaze, but suddenly laughed twice. "What's the use of being beautiful? I haven't even had a relationship in my life, I'm not willing to accept it." Si estou escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en sinisfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontrarás la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 637. Advanced Stage Cancer. In the quiet ward, Qinzu was frightened by Christine's sudden words. Unwilling? Why did he say that? Thinking of the bad guesses in his mind, Qinzu hurriedly shook his head, straightened her body, and said anxiously, "Christine, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me." Christine didn't say anything, but she couldn't hold back her tears anymore. From the beginning of silent tears, she slowly turned into a soft sob, and finally burst into tears. Now, Kinzu was even more panicked, and hurriedly reached out and stroked her back, comforting her. "Don't cry, dear Christine, tell me, what's wrong?" "Clean, I. After a long time, Christine sobbed softly, and said sadly, "I won't live for a few days." "How is it possible?" Kinzu was stunned and looked at the beauty in his arms with disbelief. "What did you just say?" "Not live for a few days." Christine raised her head and leaned gently into Kinzu's arms, her hands not forgetting to gently stroke Shirley's chubby little face. "The doctor has confirmed that it is the advanced stage of liver cancer. I can't be saved." Boom. Kinzu felt dizzy and almost suffocated. "Cancer? How is this possible? How could someone who was fine a few days ago have cancer?" Noticing the change in Kinzu's demeanor, Christine smiled bitterly and whispered to herself, "I don't want to believe this is true, but the fact is that this is liver cancer, and it is in the advanced stage." But after a long time, Kinzu couldn't say a complete sentence. This news was just as incredible as if someone told him that the world would be destroyed in 3 seconds. Christine leaned into Kinzu's arms, stopped sobbing, and asked with a chuckle, "Clean, you'll help me take care of the little girl, right?" Kinzu shook his head and refused decisively. "Chris, I can't do anything, it all depends on you. I believe you'll get better." "Will you get better?" Christine murmured to herself. "Yes, I will," Kinzu said firmly. Hearing this, Christine lowered her head and remained silent. This kind of words can only be listened to. Shirley, who was standing by, listened for a long time. Although she didn't understand what her mother and uncle were talking about, she immediately shook her head like a rattle when she heard her mother asking her uncle to take care of her in the future. She said aggrievedly, "Mom, I don't want my uncle. I want you to take care of me." The little girl's voice pulled her back from the confusion. Christine couldn't help but smile and said softly, "Shirley, be good. Let your uncle and mom take care of you together in the future, okay?" Hearing her mother say this, Shirley burst into tears and laughed. She nodded excitedly and said, "Okay, Shirley loves mom and uncle the most." Although the little girl smiled sweetly and warmly, Kinzu couldn't be happy at all. Advanced stage of cancer. These 4 words were like a mountain, pressing Kinzu's heart and leaving him no room for recovery. Just like Sun Wukong who have been suppressed for hundreds of years, you can have all kinds of martial arts, but there is no room for you to display them. His mind was in a mess, and he didn't know what he was thinking. Even when the door of the ward was pushed open and Cargill walked in again, he didn't react at all. "Chris, the room is ready. Let Mr. Keen go and rest." Cargill put a few room cards next to Kinzu's hand and said in a very unfriendly tone. Christine smiled bitterly, handed the room card to Kinzu, and said softly, "You take Shirley to sleep first." After saying that, he shook his head helplessly. "I originally wanted you to come tomorrow, and then I would be discharged from the hospital. Now I have to let you stay in a hotel first." Kinzu came back to his senses and didn't take the room card. Instead, he asked, "Are you going to be discharged tomorrow?" Christine nodded, and forced the room card into his hand, and said in a flat tone, "It's already in the late stage, there is no hope, there is no need to suffer in the hospital, it's better to live comfortably at home." Kinzu opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything. He wanted to persuade her to be hospitalized. Even if there was a glimmer of hope, he couldn't give up. But in the end, Kinzu still sighed bitterly and said nothing. He believed that Christine knew what to consider more clearly than he did. But, let him go to the hotel to sleep now. How is that possible? So, Kinzu handed the room card to Cargill next to him. He looked at Christine and said seriously, "I'm not going anywhere. I'll just stay here." Cargill was angry. Did this man do it on purpose? Kinzu ignored her embarrassed expression, but turned to look at Dale and Erica who followed in, and ordered, "You go to sleep, you don't have to watch over me, nothing will happen here." Dale shook her head, walked out with Erica expressionlessly, and did not go to the hotel, but just stood guard at the door, like 2 door guards. Kinzu was helpless, but he didn't pay too much attention to them. He turned around and looked at Cargill beside him and said, "You should go and rest too. I'm the only one here today." Cargill raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He didn't say anything, nor did he turn around and leave the ward. Instead, he sat on the other side of the bed and accompanied Christine. Seeing this, Christine was also a little helpless, and said with a wry smile, "What are you doing? I haven't reached that stage yet. I'm still fine now." Cargill shook his head and persuaded, Chris, don't rush to leave the hospital. I have contacted a private doctor and asked him to come and check you again tomorrow. Christine sighed weakly, slowly lay down on the bed, stroked Shirley's neatly combed ponytail, and said, It's useless. It has come to this point. I have accepted my fate. I can live a few more days. At this point, Christine suddenly laughed again, looking at the little girl in front of her, and said in a relaxed tone, I've decided. Starting tomorrow, I will take Shirley to travel around the world. For so many years, I have always wanted to go to China for a good stroll, but I haven't been able to go. This time I finally have a chance. Hearing this, Shirley looked up in surprise and asked, Mom, are you telling the truth? Kristen nodded and looked at Shirley with a distressed face. It's Mom's fault for not being able to accompany you properly these years, don't blame Mom. The little girl shook her head and said happily, Shirley knows Mom is busy, and she is very happy to have Uncle accompany her. Kristen's expression darkened, and then she forced a smile and said, Then Mom is relieved. You must listen to Uncle in the future, understand? Chapter 638 Follow-up. Kinzu stood by, looking at the scene in front of him. His nose was a little sour, but he didn't know what to say. Perhaps at this moment, people will realize the preciousness of life. Walking out of the ward, leaning on the corridor and quietly looking at the ceiling above his head, what can he do? Oral liquid? The function of oral liquid is to optimize and improve genes, so is it effective for cancer? Boss, what's wrong with Miss Gary? Dale on the side also noticed the abnormal atmosphere and asked in disbelief. Kinzu did not answer, scratching his hair irritably, thinking whether to exchange a drop of oral liquid first and let her try it. After all, it's always good to have hope. At this moment, the door of the ward was pushed open, and Cargill walked out with red eyes. Mr. Clean, I'd better send you to rest. It's useless to stay here at night. Kinzu shook his head, took out his mobile phone from his pocket, and called Douglas. The call was connected, and Douglas's somewhat heavy breathing sound came out from the microphone. Hi, my dear Clean, don't you know that it is immoral to disturb others' good things? Kinzu was stunned. He raised his hand to check the time. It was not even 10 o'clock yet, and he was already exercising. After 2 dry coughs, Kinzu said a little embarrassedly, Doug, I'm sorry to disturb your good things, but I really have something urgent to find you now. Oh? Douglas responded in confusion, and then there was a rustling sound on the other end of the phone, and then he asked, Tell me, Clean, is there anything I can help with? Kinzu didn't waste time and asked directly, Doug, you should have a private doctor, can you lend it to me? Private doctor? Douglas' voice became a little anxious. Clean, what's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? Kinzu shook his head, thought about it, and told the truth. Fuck, how is it possible? After listening to Kinzu's story, Douglas was stunned. Advanced cancer? This is definitely not true. Douglas laughed twice and said in a dry voice, Clean, you are joking, right? Today is not April Fool's Day. This joke is not funny at all. Kinzu sighed, I don't believe this is true, so I want your private doctor to come and see. After confirming that Kinzu was not joking, Douglas could no longer suppress his emotions and cursed angrily. Damn it, how could a person who was still alive and kicking a few days ago become like this? Damn hospital, just talking nonsense. After cursing, Douglas remembered Kinzu's purpose and asked hurriedly, Clean, which damn hospital are you in? I'll rush over. When Kinzu whispered the address, Douglas said he would be there soon, and then hung up the phone in a hurry. It's useless. We are looking for the best doctor in this hospital. He is very famous in the whole New York. Cargill shook his head, looking dejected. Although she had just said that she would ask a private doctor to come and see tomorrow, it was just deceiving himself. We can't just give up like that. Kinzu's eyes were still a little lifeless looking at the ceiling, but his tone was very firm. Even if this result is true, I will find a way to cure her. Cargill was a little stunned looking at Kinzu with a determined face. For the first time, she found that the man who was competing with her for her lover was not so annoying. After waiting at the door for less than 20 minutes, Douglas, who looked anxious, came over with 2 or 3 middle-aged white men carrying medical boxes. Clean, where is Christine? How is she now? Kinzu did not waste time with him, pushed open the door of the ward, and walked in with a few people. In the room, Christine, who was holding Shirley and feeling sad, was awakened by the sound of the door being pushed open. When he looked up, he saw the few people coming in, and his face changed. Doug, why are you here? As soon as he walked into the ward, seeing Christine, whose face was so pale that there was almost no blood, Douglas' heart sank to the bottom, and his face became very ugly. "Chris, why didn't you inform me of such a big thing?" Christine opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she didn't know how to start, so she looked at Kianzu with a somewhat resentful look. The meaning revealed in that look was very clear. "Who asked you to tell him?" Kianzu touched his nose, and he suddenly realized that there seemed to be some kind of relationship between Christine and Douglas that he didn't know about. However, it was not the time to entangle this. Looking at Christine's resentful eyes, he hurriedly said, "Doug, let the doctor give Chris a full body check first. I think this damn hospital must have misdiagnosed." Douglas came back to his senses, turned around and looked at a thin middle-aged white man wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses next to him, and said in a heavy voice, "Jason, please." The middle-aged white man opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but after hesitating for a moment, he nodded. "Mr. Doug, I'll do my best." Although he agreed, Johnson still felt a little reluctant in his heart, because he knew that these were all useless efforts. This is not to say that his medical skills are not good and he is a fake. On the contrary, as a private doctor who is very famous in New York, or in the United States and Europe, Johnson's medical skills are obvious to all. Moreover, he is the private doctor of Douglas's family, the chief private doctor of the entire Doug family, not just his own. Under normal circumstances, he only serves Douglas's family and only visits patients in extremely special circumstances. When Douglas received Kianzu's call, his first reaction was to call Johnson. As for his usual private doctor, he didn't even consider it. Johnson knew about today's mission on the way, and he knew more about Christine's identity. However, Johnson also knew about the overall medical level of Columbia and Cornell Presbyterian Hospital in New York. Therefore, when he came here at the beginning, he didn't have much hope. When he walked into the ward and saw Christine's pale face that was almost transparent, he sighed deeply in his heart. He was almost certain that the hospital could not have misdiagnosed. Looking at Douglas and the people around him, with their desperate yet expectant eyes, he wanted to speak directly and tell them that these were useless. But after hesitating for a moment, he still sat down beside the bed and took the various examination reports from Cargill. Not for anything else, just to make everyone give up. "Thank you for the support from the Taoist priests among the Taoist priests. It's a new week, Liu asks for support. I've been too busy recently. I'll be at work this Sunday. I'll try my best to keep up with the update." Chapter 639 Misdiagnosis. Johnson's hesitant expression was not only seen by Douglas, but also by Kianzu and Christine. This made Douglas, who was already feeling a little heavy, even more gloomy. And Christine, who had a little fantasy, turned pale again, almost like a blank sheet of paper. Among the few people, Kianzu was the only one who still had a little hope for the result. For some reason, he had a strange feeling in his heart when he saw Christine for the first time. He always felt that Christine's body function had not degenerated to that point, which was very different from the manifestation of cancer. But Christine's pale face and weak expression made Kianzu a little unsure. He hoped that his feeling was right, but he was worried that it was just his fantasy. No matter how everyone felt, the moment Johnson sat down, the whole ward became silent. However, under the nervous gaze of everyone, Johnson's expression was very strange. From the initial heaviness, to the slight frown after a moment, to the uncertainty afterwards, the people watching him were in a state of ups and downs, and they could not figure out the answer. As time went by, Johnson flicked through the reports faster and faster. He had already finished reading several thin reports, but he had no intention of putting them down. He kept flipping through them in his hands, as if there was something wrong with them. Not only that, he also performed a series of simple examinations on Christine. After a long time, Johnson raised his head, took a long breath, and asked everyone, "Who is Miss Carey's attending physician?" Kianzu and Douglas shook their heads in confusion, but Cargill, who was standing next to them, stood up and said anxiously, "Dr. Johnson, Miss Carey's attending physician is a doctor. Is there something wrong with the examination?" After hearing Cargill's words, everyone's eyes were focused on Johnson. Including Christine, everyone's hearts could not help but rise a glimmer of dawn. Under the gaze of the crowd, Johnson nodded seriously and said in a deep voice, "If my eyes are not wrong, then this is a very serious medical accident." Boom. Johnson's words were like a time bomb, exploding in everyone's mind. Not to mention Douglas and Christine, even Kianzu, who had thought of this possibility in his mind, was stunned. Medical accident. Medical accident. Does this mean that Christine does not have cancer? Sensing everyone's thoughts, Johnson nodded affirmatively. Miss Gary just has some minor problems with her liver. It's not even hepatitis, let alone liver cancer. Johnson shook his head in confusion. I have also heard of Bruce Arthur's name. Logically, he should not make such a basic mistake. However, everyone didn't listen to what Johnson said later at this moment. Their attention was all attracted by his previous words. Gary, did you hear that? You're fine. Cargill came to the window with an excited look on his face, holding Christine's hands tightly, his voice trembling and he could hardly utter a complete sentence. Kinzu also came to the bed with a look of surprise, snatched a jade hand from Cargill's dissatisfied hand, and said excitedly, I told you, Gary, you will be fine. I must sue that damn doctor. Christine was also overwhelmed by this huge turn of events and surprise, and let the two hold her hands, shaking with excitement. Dr. Johnson, is this true? Really? I'm really fine? After asking 3 questions in a row, Christine stared at Johnson tightly, hoping to hear the answer she wanted to hear from him. Johnson looked at Christine seriously and assured her in a very serious tone. Ms. Gary, I assure you with the honor of a medical worker that there is absolutely nothing wrong with your body. It is just liver discomfort caused by overwork. With proper care, you will be able to recover. Really, this is true, I really don't have to die. The tears that had been accumulated for a long time rushed out, and Christine's teeth were trembling slightly with excitement. She only felt that the dark cloud above her head that was oppressing her and making her breathless finally began to slowly dissipate. As a normal person, if you can live well, who would give up their life easily? Seeing that everyone was a little bit unconvinced, Johnson suggested, Mr. Doug, if you are still worried, you can go to another hospital and have another full body check. Yes, go to another hospital and have another check. Douglas, who was stunned on the spot, suddenly woke up, and didn't care whether Johnson would be unhappy, and immediately made a decision. Facts have proved that Johnson is still very tolerant and understands the emotions of the patient's family very well. Seeing that everyone decided to recheck, he immediately took out his mobile phone and said, in this case, I will contact the hospital and ask them to prepare first, and we can start the examination directly when we go there. Douglas and Kinzu had no objection to this and nodded in agreement. Kinzu had no objection because he had no good channels to contact the hospital. Douglas, on the other hand, simply knew the relationship between Johnson and some hospitals, and it was really unnecessary for him to do such a small matter. While Johnson was contacting the hospital, Kinzu helped Christine pack her things and stopped her from getting up, saying, Chris, you are too weak, don't get up, I will just find an ambulance. Douglas nodded in agreement and echoed, yes, Chris, don't get up, just find an ambulance and go there. As he spoke, Johnson walked into the ward, followed by several medical staff from the hospital, who came to help Christine push the bed. They didn't know the reason why Christine was transferred to another hospital, and they didn't even know that it was Christine who was in the ward. Because when she was hospitalized, she had disguised herself in order not to attract media attention. Moreover, with her current frail appearance, not to mention that she had disguised herself, even if she showed her true face, few people would be able to recognize her. With Johnson's help, the transfer went very smoothly. Kinzu and Douglas suppressed their dissatisfaction and waited for the subsequent examination report to come out before making any plans. Chapter 640. A false alarm. Their examination went smoothly. Under Johnson's leadership, everyone came to the New York University Medical Center. Here, an attending doctor was already waiting for everyone. When the ambulance stopped, medical staff immediately came to help. Carl, thank you for your help. Johnson exchanged a few words with the slightly fat doctor, and then, accompanied by the two, gave Christine a comprehensive examination. The examination report did not come out so quickly, so everyone gathered in a brand new ward and waited patiently. After Johnson's introduction, Kinzu and others also got to know this slightly fat doctor named Carl. Carl is one of the top doctors in the New York University Medical Center. He was ready to go to bed, but he received a call from his old friend Johnson, which made him get up from the bed and rush over from home. Hey, Johnson, what's the situation now? While waiting for the examination report, Carl asked his old friend in a strange way. Obviously, his medical skills are better than mine, so why did he call me and ask me to come? Is this patient's condition very strange? Or is there a new case? Carl was full of confusion and bewilderment. Johnson shook his head. Carl, this is just an ordinary case. Just pretend that I don't exist and diagnose it according to your own method. The reason why he didn't tell Carl the specific reason directly was that Johnson was afraid that Carl would be influenced by him after knowing it. In that case, this examination would be in vain and meaningless. After seeing Johnson's firm attitude, Carl did not ask any more questions even though he still had a lot of doubts in his heart, but waited quietly. On the bed, Christine's face was full of excitement and anxiety, and even the little girl in her arms seemed to be able to feel her mother's uneasiness. Reaching out her little hand, Shirley gently stroked Christine's thin face and comforted her softly. "Mom, you will be fine. You still have to accompany Shirley to travel around the world." Hearing the little girl's tender voice, Christine came back to her senses, smiled and stroked the little girl's head. "Well, Mom knows, when things are over, Mom will take you to travel around the world, okay?" The little girl heard the words, touched the corner of her clothes and thought for a while, and asked with some expectation, "Mom, then shall we take Uncle to travel around the world together?" Christine was stunned. "Take Kinsey with you, a family of 3. As soon as she thought of this, she quickly shook her head, as if she wanted to throw away those evil thoughts in her mind. But sometimes, the more you don't want to think about something, the more she will think about it unconsciously. Christine is like this now. She doesn't want to admit that she has just fallen. Just when the little girl couldn't wait to know whether her mother wanted to take Uncle Kinsey to travel around the world together. There was a sound of footsteps outside the ward, and with a creak, the door of the ward was pushed open from the outside. "Dr. Carl, these are the examination reports." A graceful female nurse, holding a stack of documents that was much thicker than before, handed it to Carl, who looked serious. Yes, a serious face. Although he didn't know why Johnson was like this today, Carl knew that this matter was definitely not that simple. However, looking at the report in his hand, Carl looked at a loss. Isn't this normal? Although there are some problems with the liver, these are all minor problems, right? Looking up and scanning the crowd who were staring at him nervously, Carl muttered in his heart that something seemed to be wrong. If it was that simple, there was no need to make such a big scene, right? No, I'll take a closer look. Thinking of this, Carl's expression became more serious, and he lowered his head and looked through the package carefully again. However, at this moment, he had already scolded Johnson beside him in his heart. "I know that you're better at medicine than me, but you shouldn't make things difficult for me, right?" What he didn't know was that his current performance made the crowd of onlookers feel a little nervous. Especially Christine. Kinsey could clearly feel that her palms were covered with sweat. After a long time, Carl shook his head with a definite look. Kinsey and his friend's hearts suddenly rose to their throats, fearing that those words would come out of this guy's mouth. Under the nervous gaze of Kinsey and his friends, Carl looked at Johnson next to him helplessly. "Hey, man, this is boring. A patient with mild liver damage, you pulled me out of the warm bed, damn it." Wow. As soon as Carl finished speaking, Kinsey and his friends cheered, especially Cargill. This girl directly pushed Kinsey aside, occupied Christine alone, and murmured something excitedly. Hey, you squeezed the child." Kinsey picked up Shirley, who was squeezed aside and looked a little pitiful, and yelled at Cargill with a dissatisfied face. On the other side, Johnson looked at Carl, who was a little dissatisfied in front of him, and his mood also relaxed. "Hey, man, listen to my explanation." Johnson said that what happened today in detail, and especially showed Carl the original test report. The diagnosis result of advanced cancer on it shocked Carl. Fuck, this can't be true. How could he make such a serious mistake? Carl shook his head in disbelief and took the report to read it carefully. But after reading it over and over again and comparing it with the 2 test reports for a long time, he still shook his head and said with some gloating, "It seems that Bruce Arthur is going to be unlucky this time. I really don't know how he made such a serious misdiagnosis, unless his brain was flooded at the time." Carl was in a good mood. The 2 hospitals were the first and second in New York, and they were in a competitive relationship. What's more, they are both top doctors in 2 hospitals. Now that he saw that the other party had made such a big mistake, he was able to do his best not to hit the man when he was down. Just like what Mr. Euro said in his crosstalk, colleagues are enemies. After the examination, everyone was completely relieved. Originally, Christine was going to be discharged directly to go home. She didn't want to smell the damp smell of disinfectant for a moment. However, Carl suggested, "Ms. Gary, although your health problems are not serious, there are some minor problems after all. I think you should stay here for a while to recuperate." Chapter 641 System Mission reappears. Christine finally followed Carl's advice. It was so late today anyway, so she decided to stay in the hospital for one night. As for Kinzu and the others, she drove them out. According to her, it was enough for her to have Cargill accompany her. Looking at Cargill standing at the door of the ward with a smug look on his face, Kinzu was quite unhappy. He wanted to press this big foreign horse on the bed and teach him a lesson. "Little girl, your mother doesn't want us anymore, what should we do?" Kinzu picked up Shirley and pretended to be helpless to provoke her. Before Shirley could say anything, Cargill couldn't stand it anymore and hurriedly explained, "Hey, little princess, your mother doesn't want you. She is sick now and needs to rest. You go home and sleep first, and your aunt will come to pick you up, okay?" While talking, Cargill glared at Kinzu fiercely, scolding this guy in his heart. The little girl arched her back in Kinzu's arms, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and muttered, "Mom needs to rest, then uncle, let's go in and rest with Mom, okay?" Kinzu was happy in his heart, and seeing Cargill's embarrassed face, he deliberately said, "Okay, let's go and rest with Mom." Shirley nodded happily, but now she could hardly open her eyes, so she could only lean gently on her uncle's shoulder, entering a state of half-sleep. Cargill blocked the door, looking at Kinzu with anger, and whispered, "Clean, what are you doing? Don't you know that Kerry needs to rest?" Kinzu pouted. Of course he knew that Kerry needed to rest. But looking at the girl's nervous look, he couldn't help but want to tease her. "Okay, Clean, we should go." At this time, Douglas, who had communicated with Cargill, came over with Johnson. Seeing this, Kinzu stopped teasing Cargill, and hugged Shirley and followed the two of them out of the hospital. At this moment, it was almost 12 o'clock in the morning. As soon as he walked out of the hospital, a cold wind mixed with water vapor blew in his face, making Kinzu shiver involuntarily. Wrapping up his clothes, Kinzu hugged the little girl who was sleeping in his arms more tightly. "Clean, what are your plans for the evening? Do you want to stay at my place for one night?" Standing on the steps at the entrance of the hospital, Douglas turned and looked at Kinzu, with a hint of fatigue in his tone. He had just climbed out of the woman's bed and ran to the hospital without stopping. Tonight was indeed a bit tiring for him. Kinzu looked at his slightly swollen eyes, smiled bitterly and shook his head. You are not young, take care of your body." Douglas waved his hand indifferently and said with a smile, "Clean, you don't understand this. If you don't indulge yourself when you're young, when will you indulge yourself?" Then, he looked at Kinzu with an expression of disappointment. "This is the first time I've seen a billionaire like you who stays in a shabby ranch all day." Kinzu touched his nose and said depressedly, "Aren't those who buy ranches for vacation billionaires?" No, that's different." Douglas raised his eyebrows. "You also said that they're on vacation, how can they be the same as you?" Kinzu was stunned and shrugged helplessly. "Forget it, I can't argue with you." As he said that, he raised the room card in his hand and said with a smile, "I won't disturb you tonight, I have already booked a hotel." Seeing this, Douglas didn't say anything. After saying hello to Kinzu and the others, he drove away with Johnson. After the two left, Kinzu looked at Dale and Erica behind him, pondered for a while, and said, "Dale, you and Kristen have met a few times, so you stay here today and help Cargill take care of it. Remember to call me if you have any questions." Dale nodded without hesitation, handed the car keys to Erica, and turned to go upstairs. Kinzu was relieved when he saw this. He actually wanted to stay and take care of it himself. But after thinking about it carefully, it seemed inconvenient for him to stay here since there were only women here, so he simply left Dale behind. After Dale left, Erica went to the parking lot and drove Kinzu's Cadillac out. After getting in the car, Kinzu first put the sleeping little girl in the safety seat and sat her down, and then he got in. After getting in the car, he fastened his seatbelt, and Kinzu didn't forget to cover the little girl's head with his hand to prevent her from accidentally hitting anything. The Cadillac sped along the way, and soon, several people arrived at the hotel that Cargill had booked at the beginning. After entering the room and washing up, Kinzu put the little girl on the soft big bed and covered her with a quilt. He lay on the other side, leaning against the headboard, unable to fall asleep for a long time. Although today's incident was just a false alarm in the end, it still touched Kinzu a lot. When Christine asked him to take good care of the little girl in the future in a pleading tone, Kinzu's heart was like a knife cutting. For the first time, he felt that life was so fragile, just like the porcelain as thin as a cicada's wing, which would be shattered to pieces with just a slight touch. While feeling sorry for Christine, Kinzu also felt a deep sense of powerlessness from the bottom of his heart. Faced with this situation, the only thing he could do was to pray that God would open his eyes, and pray that this was just a misunderstanding. Perhaps God heard his prayers, and all this was really a misunderstanding. While being happy for Christine, Kinzu was constantly thinking in his heart. If this happens again next time, will God open his eyes again? Maybe. Maybe not. Kinzu didn't want to leave this matter to fate. So, he is thinking now. What methods or things can he have to help him realize this idea? Gene enhancement? Not to mention that it can only be used once, and it seems to have no effect on this kind of cell or virus-related diseases. After all, cancer cells are also cells. Gene enhancement, then all will be enhanced together. Or a liquid? This seems to be similar to gene enhancement, both are comprehensive enhancement props. After thinking for a long time, Kinzu realized that he seemed to be a bit useless. He can't fight, he can't treat diseases, and he can't do business. Can he only stay on the ranch and live like this for the rest of his life? Just when Kinzu was extremely entangled, the long-lost system prompt sound rang softly in his ears. System task. Dear host, because a doctor misdiagnosed after drinking, Miss Christine was frightened. Please make him pay the price within 48 hours. Task reward. Primary medical skills, Christine favorability plus 20. What the hell? Kinzu suddenly sat up. Did he hear it right? The system has another task. Chapter 642 Helpless Kinzu. In the morning, Kinzu sat on the balcony of the hotel suite, watching the busy streets of New York, feeling very happy. It must be said that the system is so user-friendly, it really gives you what you think. When he was still struggling with the health of his family and friends in the future, the system sent him elementary medical skills. Although it is only elementary now, Kinzu has asked the system, as long as there are points, it can be continuously upgraded. Of course, the skill is not in hand yet, so all this can only be thought about. Kinzu also frowned as to whether he could get the medical skill. Kinzu was sure that the doctor who misdiagnosed was the American doctor named Bruce Arthur. The reason for the misdiagnosis was very simple, he drank too much. Such a big thing, even if Kinzu didn't go to trouble him, this guy was destined to have a bad end. But if he could make him pay the price within 48 hours, that is, 2 days and 2 nights, it would be a bit difficult. After all, even if he called the police, he had to go through the judicial process, and it was not certain when the prosecution would be. Moreover, now was not the time for him to decide whether to call the police or not. Staring at the ringing phone in his hand, Kinzu shrugged and picked up the phone helplessly. Hi, Clean, I have good news for you. Bruce Arthur has been taken away by the police. Listening to Douglas's excited voice on the other end of the phone, Kinzu covered his face helplessly. He knew this would be the result. It's obvious that this guy must have used his connections to get the police to arrest him. Otherwise, it was just a misdiagnosis, and without calling the police or evidence, how could the police be so active in arresting people? Kinzu guessed correctly. When Bruce Arthur was arrested, he was still sleeping soundly at home. He couldn't remember the patient he had diagnosed and arranged for hospitalization 2 days ago. If the police hadn't mentioned it, he really couldn't remember that he had arranged for such a patient to be hospitalized. But didn't he just arrange for a patient to be hospitalized? Even if the diagnosis was problematic, it wasn't the police's responsibility, right? Just when he was about to protest, before he could say anything, the respected Dr. Bruce Arthur was knocked out by a young police officer. After the young police officer knocked out Bruce Arthur with one punch, he watched the other policeman drag him into the police car, and then he took out his cell phone and excitedly called Kinzu. Well, when Kinzu heard that this guy had actually done such a thing, he was completely convinced. Doug, will this guy be prosecuted? Prosecution is certain. Douglas' tone was very firm. If he is prosecuted, how long will it take? What are the consequences? Kinzu asked. Speaking of this, Douglas' voice became a little depressed. I asked the lawyer, this is just a simple misdiagnosis, and Kerry didn't suffer any losses, and it doesn't constitute a crime. Kinzu had a bad feeling in his heart, and asked hurriedly. In other words, the police can only detain him for a few days at most? Douglas sighed helplessly and said, yeah, there's nothing I can do about it, so I beat him up before he goes in. Kinzu was a little disappointed after hearing this. What's the point of beating him up lightly? What he wants is for this guy to pay the price. Moreover, there are only 2 short days and 2 nights. No, there are only 2 days and 1 night, because the past night is also counted as part of the mission time. Thinking of this, Kinzu couldn't sit still, and said with a somewhat complaining voice, Doug, since the police can't do anything to him, why do you still take him in? Can't we just deal with him outside? Hearing Kinzu's complaint, Douglas walked towards his car with a smug smile and exclaimed, "You don't understand this. Although the police can't convict him, as long as he goes to the police station, the matter will become a big deal. At the time, the hospital will definitely be unable to sit still, and his job and reputation will naturally be gone." Getting on his Porsche parked on the side of the road, Douglas twisted his body comfortably and sneered. At the time, it would make sense to deal with him from outside. Otherwise, you beat him up, but he still works as his doctor. What can you do? Kinzu was speechless. He had to admit that what this guy said made sense, and he felt very good listening to it. But damn, this takes time. And what I lack most now is time. After hanging up the phone, Kinzu sat on the balcony, picked up a glass of red wine that had just been filled for him and took a sip, only to feel bitterness in his mouth. Not long after the phone was hung up, someone knocked on the door of the hotel suite. Kinzu got up and walked over, looking through the peephole. It turned out that it was David. Opening the door, David, wearing a black cashmere coat, stood straight at the door. "Why are you here so early?" Kinzu made way and welcomed David in, asking with a dull look. "I'm old and can't sleep." David laughed softly twice, and then asked, "Clean, what's wrong with you? You're so listless, it's not like you." Kinzu came to the reception room, sat down on the sofa, sighed and said, "Nothing, there is just something I don't know how to do." "About the misdiagnosis?" David asked. Kinzu nodded, and then shook his head. David felt a little dizzy, and after sitting down on the sofa, he said helplessly, "Clean, can you tell me the details? I'm a little confused." Kinzu nodded awkwardly, straightened his body slightly, and narrated the incident from beginning to end. David didn't interrupt, just listened quietly. He waited until Kinzu finished speaking before asking, "Clean, are you sure that the doctor named Bruce Arthur made a misdiagnosis?" Kinzu nodded and said, "It's certain." Not only was Johnson, Douglas's personal doctor, present at the time, but also Dr. Carl from the New York Medical Center was there. David nodded slightly and said thoughtfully, "I know Johnson. He's a very famous person. Since he can be sure, it means there is nothing wrong with this matter." Then David shook his head again, sighed, and smacked his lips with some regret. "Clean, just like Douglas said, although it is clear that Bruce Arthur is responsible for this incident, it can only be regarded as a medical accident, and the patient has not been caused any substantial harm." Shrugging, David said helplessly, "Unless there are other reasons, there is really no way to prove his guilt with these words." Chapter 643 Breakthrough. Any other reasons? Kinzu pondered for a while, and suddenly said, "David, what if the doctor drank alcohol when he was diagnosing?" "Drinking alcohol?" David was stunned, then sat up straight and asked in surprise, "Clean, are you sure?" Kinzu nodded very seriously, and said in a very firm tone, "I can be sure that this guy diagnosed Christine after drinking alcohol." David touched his chin subconsciously, and a very confident smile appeared on his face. "If that's the case, then this guy is finished. How long will it take?" Kinzu was a little impatient. David looked at Kinzu in surprise, and said, "The police have to collect evidence first, and then they will file a public prosecution. At the fastest, it will take 4 or 5 days. 4 or 5 more days." Kinzu leaned back on the sofa in frustration. It seemed that there was no difference between saying it and not saying it. "What's wrong, Clean? Are you in a hurry?" David was a little confused, but he still explained, "The 4 or 5 days I mentioned to the procedures of the police. It has nothing to do with you. You can go and do other things." "No, I'm not in a hurry." Kinzu waved his hand, rolled his eyes, and said with a wry smile, "I just want to give Kerry a surprise, and get rid of the guy before she is discharged from the hospital." David nodded in understanding, pondered for a moment, and said, "If you want to speed up the efficiency of the police station, someone needs to put pressure on them." "Pressure?" Kinzu touched his nose. He understood what David meant. This requires finding connections. After all, whether at home or abroad, it is inseparable from the magic barrier of personal relationships. However, what makes Kinzu a little puzzled is that he doesn't know anyone in the New York Police Department. "Clean, in New York, Mr. Douglas still knows more people," David reminded softly. Kinzu curled his lips. He certainly knew that Douglas knew many people in New York. He could beat Bruce Arthur in front of the police, which showed their relationship. But the key point was that this guy just said that he would lock him up for 2 days, let the hospital fire him when the matter got out of hand, and then deal with him from outside. If he went there now and asked him to deal with him directly in the police station, would he agree? Wait. Kinsey suddenly reacted. The conversation he had with Douglas just now was based on the fact that Bruce Arthur had not committed a crime, but was simply a misdiagnosis. Now if this guy knew that Bruce Arthur made the misdiagnosis after being drunk, would Douglas be furious? The more Kinsey thought about it, the more possible it was. He didn't care that David was sitting in front of him. He took out his mobile phone and called Douglas directly. Douglas, who was driving a Porsche at a speed of 100 miles per hour on the busy streets of New York, was a little surprised when he received Kinsey's call. What's wrong? Clean, you don't want to go over and beat that guy up, do you? Douglas answered the phone with a hint of excitement in his voice, teasing. He's in the detention center now. With your conditions, you can't get in under normal circumstances. Kinsey didn't waste time with this guy, but spoke directly. According to reliable information, Bruce Arthur was full of alcohol when he was diagnosing Kerry. Crack. A quick and harsh brake sound rang out on the bustling streets of New York, causing an uproar among pedestrians on the roadside. However, Douglas didn't react at all. He stepped on the brakes tightly, and the steering wheel in his hand was almost bent by him. What did you say? He drank? Yes, he drank. Kinsey didn't hesitate at all. Fuck. This damn bastard. Douglas turned the steering wheel hard, and the Porsche turned directly on the streets of New York, and drove back to the police station amid a chorus of curses. Doug, what are you going to do? Kinsey asked. What should we do? Douglas sneered twice. Clean, don't worry, I will let him know what regret is. But we have no evidence. Kinsey said with some regret. Douglas' face was full of frost, and the anger in his heart could hardly be suppressed. Hearing Kinsey's words, he gritted his teeth and said, Clean, don't worry, there will be evidence. I will go directly to the hospital to check the surveillance. As long as it is confirmed that he really drank alcohol during the diagnosis, I will let him stay in there for the rest of his life. Kinsey was relieved after hearing this. Before hanging up the phone, he did not forget to remind. Be quick, don't let them react. If the hospital destroys the video, it will be a big trouble. Douglas nodded in agreement. Don't worry, I will go to the police station soon. They should not know about this now. We will go directly to the hospital in a while. Kinsey's heart moved, and he was about to say that he would go over to take a look, but thinking of Shirley in the bedroom, he could only sigh helplessly. After hanging up the phone, Kinsey looked at David on the other side and said with a smile, I feel relieved now, let Douglas do the work. David also nodded in agreement. He will be more powerful than me in handling this matter. After all, this is Douglas' home court. Kinsey also felt that what David said made sense. After all, David himself was just a lawyer. Although he knew some friends, Bruce Arthur was not bad either. As the attending physician in the #1 hospital in New York, his connections were not worse than David's. After sitting in the room for a while, when the little girl woke up, Kinsey looked at David and asked with a smile, I'm going to the hospital to see Gary, are you going with me? David shook his head, stood up, and said with a smile, Clean, today is a working day. Do you think everyone doesn't have to go to work like you? Kinsey was stunned, and then he remembered that today was not the weekend. He raised his wrist to check the time. It was almost 9 o'clock, so he smiled and said, Then I won't delay your work time. I'll treat you to a meal when things are over. David smiled and nodded, and said as he walked out, You said it. Don't blame me for eating you out of money with my family. Okay, eat as much as you want. I'll be happy even if you make me poor. Kinsey smiled, and after sending David away, he looked at Shirley, who had slept and became energetic again, and asked, Are you hungry? Let's go eat something first. The little girl nodded obediently, followed Kinsey out of the room, and didn't forget to turn around and close the door. After meeting Erica, Kinsey and the other two ate something in the hotel and drove to the New York Medical Center. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subieron sin esfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontrar la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 644 Discharge. When Kinsey came to the ward with Shirley in his arms, Christine was already dressed and sitting on the sofa in the ward waiting for him. Why are you in such a hurry? Kinsey was a little stunned. He looked at Christine's face. Although it was much better than yesterday, it still looked a little pale. I really don't want to stay in this damn place for a second. I can't wait to go back to my familiar home. Christine shook her head, and her tone was also full of impatience. Seeing this, Kinzu didn't know what to say. After putting Shirley on the ground, he began to help get things and prepared to go back. At this time, the door of the ward was knocked, and Carl, wearing a white coat, walked in from outside. Seeing everyone like this, he asked in surprise, "Mr. Clean, are you preparing to be discharged from the hospital?" Kinzu nodded and said helplessly, "It's mainly because Kerry was frightened and wants to go back to recuperate." Then he looked at Carl and asked, "Mr. Carl, can you please help me see if she can be discharged from the hospital now?" Carl nodded in understanding and said with a smile, "Then go for another checkup." Kinzu looked at Christine with a consulting look. For such a matter, he thought it would be better to let Christine make her own decision. Facing Kinzu's concerned eyes, although Christine was a little helpless, she still nodded obediently. So, Dale and Cargill accompanied Christine to do the checkup under Carl's guidance. Kinzu was responsible for accompanying Shirley in the ward and guarding the luggage. He was a real left-behind man. To be honest, Kinzu was really speechless about the way these Western-style hospitals check this and that at every turn. Sometimes you go to the hospital just to see a doctor for a mild cold. It's obvious that a few cold medicines can solve the problem, but you have to check a lot of items first. Test this and that, and then take the report to the doctor, and the doctor will prescribe medicine according to the standard. And many people will say that the doctor asked you to go for a checkup, which is responsible for your body. After all, he doesn't know what disease you have. But do you really think those tests are free? No matter if you are sick or not, no matter whether it is a big disease or a small disease, after a checkup, hundreds of yuan are gone. For rich people, a few hundred yuan is equivalent to a few cents, but for Kinzu, who just graduated from college, it is not a small amount. Whenever this happens, Kinzu can't help but sigh, our ancestors are still awesome. No matter if you are sick or not, and where the disease is, people can see it at a glance. Shaking his head, Kinzu threw his thoughts behind him. No matter what happened in the past, there is no need for him to worry about such things now. Now the only thing he needs to worry about is that after completing the task, the medical skills rewarded by the system are not Western medicine. Otherwise, when I treat the patient, I need to take him to the hospital for a full-body checkup, which is ridiculous. While I was thinking about it, the door of the ward was pushed open again, and Kristen walked in with a few people, looking relaxed. "Clean, it's okay, I can be discharged from the hospital, I can be discharged from the hospital." As soon as she saw Kinzu, Kristen ran over excitedly. If there weren't so many people on the scene, she would have jumped directly on Kinzu. Carl, who followed in, also smiled and nodded in agreement. "Yes, Miss Kerry is fit to be discharged from the hospital, but she still needs to take medicine on time and rest, and not be too tired." Kristen, who was originally excited and wanted to jump up, suddenly became a little depressed when she heard Carl's words, and muttered dissatisfiedly, "Do you still need to take medicine? Can you not take it?" Carl shook his head calmly, not at all attracted by the world-class beauty in front of him. He decisively handed over a list and said with a smile, "You must take the medicine. I have already prescribed it. You can just take it by the way." Kinzu also took the list calmly, thanked him with a smile, and then sent Carl out of the ward. After returning, he saw Kristen sitting at the head of the bed with the list in a daze, and couldn't help asking, "Gary, what's wrong with you?" "No, nothing." Kristen smiled awkwardly, and tried to hide the list in a hurry. However, before she could make any move, Cargill, who was standing by, was quick to snatch the list. Cargill, what do you want to do?" Christine pouted in dissatisfaction, glaring at her best friend. Cargill was unmoved, took the list and looked at it carefully, and said, "I'll go get the medicine, you guys go first, we'll meet at the door." After saying that, without giving Christine a chance to refute, he took the list and walked out of the ward. I don't want to take the medicine." Christine lay down on the bed at once, rolling around in frustration. Kinzu was a little dazed. Is this still the mature and steady Christine? The style of the painting suddenly changed. Before he could express his opinion, Shirley's crisp and tender voice next to him made Christine's body freeze there. "Mom, be good, don't be afraid of taking medicine." Shirley is not afraid either. Turning his head stiffly, looking at the little girl's confident expression, Christine almost found a crack in the ground to crawl into. After all the planning, how could I have forgotten this girl? This is really embarrassing. Kinzu couldn't help laughing when he saw this. After laughing, he came to the bed and sat down. While helping Christine to sit up, he teased, "Chris, look, even the little girl is not afraid of taking medicine, you should be good too." Shirley heard her uncle mention her, so she nodded and comforted him. "Yes, Mom, the medicine is not bitter at all, I finished it in one gulp." When she said that the medicine was not bitter at all, the little girl seemed to be afraid that her mother would not believe her words, and she made exaggerated expressions, which made Christine, who was a little embarrassed, laugh directly. "Well, Mom believes in our little baby." Christine hugged the little girl and kissed her chubby little face while hugging her tightly, fearing that she would suddenly leave her again. To Christine, everything that happened yesterday was like a nightmare. The feeling of despair and helplessness made her never want to think about it again in her life. So, when the good news came today, she could no longer suppress her emotions and completely exposed her truest side to Kinzu. Although he was surprised by Christine's sudden change in style, Kinzu did not stay in the ward for long. After her emotions stabilized a little, he took a few people and walked straight to the hospital entrance. "Thanks to Yuan for the 1,888 book coins reward, thank you." Chapter 645. Douglas is surrounded by people. After going downstairs and standing at the entrance of the hospital, Kinzu was a little embarrassed. He only had a Cadillac this time, and it was a 4-seat. When they came, it was just enough for the few of them to sit, but if Kristen and Cargill were added, there would not be enough seats. Before he could figure out how to sit, Cargill had already pushed Kristen into the car. "Gary, you are not feeling well, get in the car first, Keen and I will go get the car." Kristen nodded obediently, reached out to take Shirley, put her in the safety seat, and said to the two people outside the car, "Then you guys be careful, I will go back first." Cargill nodded, closed the door, and signaled Erica in the front seat to drive. However, Erica ignored Cargill, but turned to look at Kinzu and said, "Boss, I will follow you, let Dale drive." Kinzu heard this, looked at Dale's tired expression beside him, and shook his head gently. "Forget it, you send Kerry back first, I'll be there in a while." Dale was a little worried and said, "Boss, let Erica follow you, I'll drive Miss Kerry back." "Okay, you didn't sleep well last night, go back and rest early." Although Kinzu instinctively wanted to assist Cargill's arrangement, he also knew that this was the best arrangement now. So Kinzu directly helped Dale open the car door and pushed her in. Watching the Cadillac gradually go away, Kinzu turned his head and looked at Cargill beside him, smiling and asked, "How do we get there?" Cargill glanced at this guy and said unhappily, "Of course we take a taxi, do we have to walk there?" She felt indescribably depressed that Erica ignored her words just now and had to act according to the man's face. Not to mention Christine, she almost broke up with her for this man. There are also Mobika, Onid, Eva last time, and the two women this time. Cargill couldn't figure out why these women were so interested in such a weak man. Kinzu shrugged helplessly. He knew that if they were alone, this girl would definitely not look at him well. Now it was as expected. But it didn't matter, Kinzu thought to himself. Anyway, they wouldn't spend much time alone together, so he would just treat it as coaxing a child this time. The two stood on the side of the road for a while, and then an empty taxi stopped beside them. Cargill didn't hesitate, opened the back door expressionlessly, and sat in directly. Kinzu saw this and wanted to sit in the passenger seat, but before the doors opened, he saw Cargill in the back, looking at him with disgust. In an instant, Kinzu forgot what he had said in his heart just now, and treated this time as coaxing a child. Without pulling the passenger door again, Kinzu also opened the back door and sat down next to Cargill. Yes, next to him. Because Cargill had never thought of giving up her seat to this guy, so after getting on the bus, she didn't go too far inside, and sat down near the middle. Now, half of Kinzu's body was almost sitting on one of her thighs. When Kinzu opened the door, Cargill was a little stunned, but before she could react, Kinzu sat down directly. However, although it was obvious that she was taken advantage of, as a public figure, she didn't dare to speak out, and could only weakly ask, What do you want to do?" "Nothing. Take the bus." Kinzu's matter-of-fact answer almost made Cargill angry to death. "When you take the bus, you can't sit in the front." Cargill gritted her teeth. If she hadn't cared about her image, she really wanted to stab the man in front of her to death with a knife. Kinzu shrugged his shoulders, ignored the girl, and said to the black driver in front of him who was about 30 years old, "Please go to Presbyterian Hospital." The black brother is a little different from the legends in the past. He doesn't talk much at all. After hearing Kinzu's destination, the black man nodded slightly and drove the taxi to the destination. Cargill glared at the man in front of him fiercely, and he had already scolded him in his heart. However, when she found that the black man had been looking at her through the rearview mirror, she hurriedly put on her mask tighter. As Christine's agent and rumored girlfriend, she is now in the spotlight. If someone sees her so close to a man, it will be a big deal. Fortunately, the black man just thought that the relationship between the two was a little abnormal and didn't find anything. Soon, the taxi stopped at the gate of the Presbyterian hospital. When Kinzu paid the money and got off, his mood was much brighter. Looking at the figure in front of him with a twisted waist and a little unsteady steps, Kinzu was happy in his heart. Let you still look at me with that disgusted look, I will send you to your side and let you see enough. When he was laughing foolishly, he heard a noise coming from the door of the Presbyterian church, which seemed to be very lively. Huh! Kinzu exclaimed. Could it be the guy Douglas? After calculating the time, Kinzu felt that it was unlikely. It had been so long since he came here. Logically, that guy should have gotten the things long ago. Thinking of this, Kinzu could not help but speed up his pace, past Cargill directly, and ran towards the door. Hey, man, what are you going to do? Kinzu's sudden overtaking made Cargill, who was in deep thought, a little dazed. Seeing Kinzu running towards the hospital entrance, she hurriedly shouted, We are going this way, the parking lot. You go and drive the car over first, I'll be there in a while. Kinzu's footsteps did not stop, but just waved his hand casually. A faint voice floated over from a distance, and Cargill was so angry that he stomped his feet. This guy. Cargill cursed in a low voice, looked at the car keys in her hand, and gritted her teeth and followed. She didn't have Kinzu's mobile phone number, and it would be troublesome if she couldn't find him later. Kinzu ignored Cargill behind him. When he ran to the hospital entrance, it was already surrounded by people. Moreover, from the encirclement, he could vaguely hear the familiar voice of Douglas. Kinzu was very curious. Shouldn't this guy have got the things by now? Why is he here, and surrounded by so many people? Is he coming to get it now? Thinking of this, Kinzu was ready to go in to see the situation. But damn it, who said foreigners don't join in the fun? Stand up, I promise not to beat him to death. Kinzu, who had been squeezing for a long time and couldn't squeeze in, cursed in a low voice outside. Chapter 646 Chaotic Scene. Hey, man, why are you here to join in the fun? Just as Kinzu was about to fight hard and rush inside, Cargill's dissatisfied voice sounded behind him. Turning around, looking at Cargill with a frosty face, Kinzu shrugged helplessly, Douglas is in there. What? Cargill was a little stunned, and the frost on his face instantly turned into astonishment and suspicion. Really? Kinzu pointed inside, if you don't believe me, listen carefully. Cargill slowed down his breathing with doubt, held his breath, and listened carefully. It seems, it really is a lass. Looking up, Cargill muttered to himself, why is Mr. Doug here? If I knew it was true, I wouldn't be here. Kinzu spread his hands, indicating that he was also helpless. Rolling his eyes at Kinzu, Cargill ignored him, looked at the crowded crowd, and took out a handful of US dollars from his handbag. Then, under Kinzu's stunned gaze, Cargill threw the US dollars in his hand to the ground not far away, and exclaimed in unison. Wow, whose money fell, who's this $10,000? The crowd turned around instantly, and when they saw the pile of franklins scattered on the ground, their eyes were a little straight. I don't know who suddenly shouted, that's mine, don't grab it. In an instant, the scene began to get chaotic, some pushed, some asked loudly, and some took the opportunity to stuff it into their pockets. In any case, the crowd of onlookers finally got chaotic, and correspondingly, a lot of gaps were exposed. Kinzu gave Cargill a thumbs up. I didn't expect this girl to have such a quick wit, although, a little wasteful. While everyone was in a mess, Kinzu and the other person squeezed through the crowd and came to the lobby of the hospital. However, the scene in front of him made him a little dumbfounded. I saw several policemen surrounded by a group of doctors, and they were still pushing and shoving. Even Douglas was pushed back. What was going on? What do you want to do? I tell you, the police support team will be here soon. You are committing a crime. Douglas was angry and yelled at the doctor who was pushing him. Facing Douglas's threat, the doctor who was pushing him was not afraid. Instead, he shouted to the doctors around him. Don't be afraid, they illegally detained our colleagues. We are going to sue them. The doctors who had become a little timid when they heard that the police support team was about to arrive suddenly became tough. Not to mention Kinzu was dumbfounded, even Cargill, who had always seen a lot of big scenes, was a little dumbfounded. But her reaction was faster than Kinzu. Seeing that Douglas and his team were in a weak position, Cargill quickly took out a mobile phone and called the police center. Hearing that a colleague was besieged, the police center immediately exploded, and instructions were issued one after another. Now, the streets of New York have become lively. Including the patrolmen on the street and the community police in the vicinity, all swarmed towards the Presbyterian hospital. Douglas, who was surrounded, finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Kinzu and the others coming. They were surrounded by this group of guys and had no chance to call for support. Even the walkie-talkie was placed in the police car at the door. Noticing Douglas's eyes, Kinzu made an okay gesture to him, then rolled up his sleeves and prepared to teach the guy who had been chattering a lesson. Before he took 2 steps, he felt his arm being pulled by someone, and Cargill's urgent voice came over. "Damn it, Clean, what are you going to do? Go help." Kinzu looked at her as if it was a matter of course, and said, "Look at the way that doctor encourages others, he is not a good person." Cargill covered his head and said helplessly, "Clean, the police will arrive soon, and they are not in danger now. You don't need to intervene at this time." Coincidentally, Douglas also saw Kinzu's actions and waved his hand gently at him, meaning the same as Cargill, he can still handle it now. Seeing this, Kinzu had no choice but to shrug his shoulders helplessly, then folded his arms and watched the excitement with everyone. The speed at which the police came was really beyond imagination. Just when Kinzu just stood still and was ready to watch the excitement, he heard a bang outside and a crisp gunshot rang out. "Everyone squat on the spot, put your hands on your head, quickly." Kinzu was a little dazed. What was going on? He shot before he could see anyone. Cargill was not surprised by this kind of situation, and pulled Kinzu to squat down quickly. After they all squatted down, several voices quickly ran in. The 3 patrolmen who came over were nearby. They were nearby. After receiving the call from the police center, they rushed over immediately. How dare someone attack the police in New York? They were a little suspicious in their hearts, wondering if this was a prank. Then they saw the police car parked in front of the hospital and the crowds of people surrounding the door. The 3 of them panicked. One patrolman took out his gun and fired a shot into the sky to intimidate the crowd. The police in the United States have much more power than those in China. In China, only the boss has power. Here, any ordinary patrolman dares to shoot you. So firing a warning shot is a normal thing for the 3 policemen and most of the onlookers. The reason why these foreigners are so obedient is because they understand that if they refuse to comply, the next shot may be fired at them. So, after the gunshots, the crowd immediately squatted down and consciously made way for the police to enter and exit. Kinzu saw this and couldn't help but sigh in his heart that this was much more effective than Cargill's trick of throwing money. The 3 patrolmen who walked into the hospital lobby were furious when they saw a group of doctors still besieging their colleagues. One of the young but burly white patrolmen was furious when he saw this. He rushed towards a doctor who was still not giving in and kicked him far away. "Fuck. Hold your head and squat down, quick." The doctors were dumbfounded. They thought that although they were not considered upper-class people in New York, they also claimed to be high-income elites. When had they ever enjoyed such treatment from the police? The leading doctor didn't encourage the crowd at this time. While the police were nervously watching his colleagues, he quietly moved his body and wanted to slip away. Chapter 647 Gabriel admits he is cowardly. Douglas had been keeping a close eye on the guy. How could he let him run away? Seeing that the doctor was about to slip out of the crowd, he shouted to the police who came with him, "Hurry, don't let the guy run away." Hearing Douglas's shout, the police who had just breathed a sigh of relief immediately became energetic. For them, today can be said to be the most frustrating day in history. It was just a small mission, but because they didn't bring their guns, they were beaten up by a group of doctors. Well, although the doctors didn't do anything. But this is not important. The important thing is that these guys gave them the feeling that they wanted to beat them up. So, when they saw the leader who was still trying to escape, they felt that the anger of the day reached its peak in an instant, just like a volcano about to erupt, and they could no longer suppress it. "Fuck, you stop right there." One of the young police officers finally erupted when he saw that the guy was still running away. Although the situation has been temporarily controlled, the police are still coming one after another. In just a moment, more than 20 policemen gathered in the hospital lobby, and all of them were armed. With this lineup, not to mention just a dozen doctors who were instigated, even if the mob came, they could fight. After all, the patrolmen in New York, an international metropolis, are not like those in small cities, where they are basically fat old men. Such a big commotion in the hospital lobby has long attracted the attention of the hospital leaders, but because the dean was not there, no one came down to meddle. Just as the police were about to take all the doctors back to the police station, the dean of the Presbyterian Hospital, Gabriel Page, walked in with a surprised look on his face. "What are you doing?" Looking at the chaotic hospital lobby, Gabriel Page's face was a little ugly. If the commotion continued like this, how could he dare to get business? In particular, when he saw that the main doctors in his hospital were still handcuffed, Gabriel Page's face became even darker. Staring closely at the leading second-level police inspector, Gabriel Page asked with a gloomy face, "Mr. Policeman, I wonder what crime my employees have committed that requires them to be handcuffed." The leading second-level police inspector was named Fred Vaughan. He received a call from the police center while on patrol, so he rushed over. He didn't know the cause and process of the incident. He only knew that it seemed that these doctors resisted law enforcement and tried to beat up the police officers. This was enough to determine his position. Not to mention, he also recognized the young master of the Douglas family among them. Looking at the doctor who looked like a leader in front of him with a half-smile, Fred Vaughan picked up the transcript and asked, "Sir, you said they are your employees?" Seeing Gabriel Page nod, Fred Vaughan's face became serious, closed the transcript, and said in a deep voice, "Then can I assume that the reason they did this was entirely under your instructions?" Gabriel Page's brows unconsciously wrinkled into a ball when he heard this, and he kept cursing the policeman who was asking questions in front of him. "What do you mean I instructed? I don't know anything, I instructed your uncle." Although he cursed in his heart, Gabriel Page still had to squeeze out a smile and explained very aggrievedly, "Mr. Policeman, this must be a misunderstanding. I just came back from outside and I don't know anything." There was no way, he had to explain. What if he was inexplicably put in jail by this ill-intentioned guy in front of him on a random charge? That would be a lot of fun. After hearing Gabriel's explanation, Fred's expression eased up and he said in a cold voice, "Your employee is suspected of assaulting a police officer. We are going to take him back for investigation. I hope you can cooperate." Attacking a police officer? Gabriel's face turned green. This bastard was too insidious. If he had taken this crime in excitement just now, he would probably never get out of this life. Yes, assaulting a police officer. More than a dozen people beat up the police officer we were investigating. Fred explained lightly. After that, he deliberately glanced at Gabriel and said with a smile, "Fortunately, you are not the mastermind, otherwise you would have to go back with us." "No, I don't know anything." Gabriel shook his head like a rattle. He felt that he needed to go upstairs first and find someone to come over to understand the situation. Thinking of this, Gabriel couldn't stay any longer. He said hello, and after getting Fred's permission, he ran upstairs without looking back. Kinzu was watching from the side and was a little overwhelmed. He touched Cargill with his arm and asked, "That guy should be the leader of the hospital, right?" Cargill glanced at Kinzu, busy with his mobile phone in his hand, and said, "That's Gabriel, the director of the Presbyterian Hospital." The director of such a big hospital is so cowardly? Kinzu felt a little incredible. Stopping his actions, Cargill raised his head and looked at Kinzu seriously, saying, "It's different here from China. I have been to China. The leaders of the big hospitals there are basically officials, but it's different here. They are just professional managers." Kinzu nodded as if he understood, and asked, "In other words, the director is just a senior worker?" "That's right." Cargill lowered his head again and sent a message to someone unknown. Kinzu curled his lips. Seeing that the situation was under control, he did not hesitate and walked straight towards Douglas. "What's wrong with you?" "I was just retrieving a video, and look what you did." Douglas, who was originally talking to Fred, turned around and said unhappily, "How would I know what's going on? I originally wanted them to assist the police in solving the case, but who knew that your guy would suddenly show up and say that we illegally detained their colleague?" Sighing, Douglas sat down on the sofa next to him helplessly, rubbed his sore waist, and complained, "These bastards are really brave. After being instigated by the guy, they almost attacked us." Fred interrupted at this time. "Mr. Doug, I wonder what case you were going to handle at the beginning. You can continue now." Douglas slapped his thigh and stood up suddenly again. "Damn, I almost forgot about it after being treated like this." As he said that, he looked at Fred on the side and asked, "Mr. Fred, I wonder if you can bring a few people with me to the hospital's monitoring room to retrieve the video?" Chapter 648 Surveillance in hand. Just as Douglas and several policemen were rushing to the hospital monitoring room, Gabriel, who had already come to his office, was cautiously talking on the phone. "Mr. Bob, this is what happened. What should we do now?" There was silence on the other end of the phone for a moment before a middle-aged man's angry curse was heard. "Fuck, what does Adam want to do? He even attacked the police. Why doesn't he just die?" Gabriel shrugged helplessly. He also wanted Adam Warren, the vice president, to die. Not only did he bring so much trouble to the hospital, but the key point was that he was also implicated. His rating on the board of directors was expected to drop several levels. The middle-aged man on the other end of the phone kept cursing for several minutes, then slowly stopped. After a moment of silence, he ordered, "Gabriel, don't worry about this matter, let them go, I will see how it goes." Gabriel breathed a sigh of relief and thought that this was the best way. "I was too lazy to care about this matter," so he hurriedly said, "Mr. Bob, I understand, I will appease the other doctors, don't worry." "Well, that's it, run your hospital well, the board of directors is very satisfied with this year's profits, keep up the good work." After saying some encouraging words as usual, Bob hung up the phone. He also had to seize the time to deal with this matter. The process of retrieving the video was smooth sailing. Under the protection of the fully armed police, no hospital security dared to stop it. After some retrieval, Douglas found the video of that night. When he saw Bruce Arthur staggering into the ward in the video, if he hadn't been concerned about the different hardness, Douglas's fist would have wanted to hit the display screen directly. "I will make this guy pay the price." Douglas, furious, walked out with the extracted video. Fred followed closely and comforted him. "Don't worry, Mr. Doug. With this evidence, we will deal with it severely." Turning back, Douglas stared at him and asked, "How long would it take?" "This." Fred was silent for a moment, and then he promised as if he had made up his mind. 3 days, within 3 days, I will definitely send him to prison. No, I don't want to see him again for a moment. At the latest, tomorrow, I will see that guy in prison." As he said that, Douglas turned around and continued to walk out of the hospital, but continued in his mouth, "Of course, it would be better if it can be done today." Fred wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled bitterly in his heart. "Today? How is it possible?" But Douglas didn't give him a chance to refute. He strode into the hospital lobby and found Kinsey, who was a little anxious. Sitting on the sofa in the hall, Kinsey's eyes drifted to the valuable paper clip on his wrist from time to time. Of course, what attracted him now was no longer the value of the paper clip itself, but the hour and minute hands that kept turning. "It's been more than 20 minutes, why haven't they come out yet?" Kinsey muttered to himself in some confusion. When he was hesitating whether to go up to find them, he heard a noise not far away. Turning around, Douglas was surrounded by several policemen and strode towards him. Seeing this, Kinsey quickly stood up from the sofa, and under Cargill's puzzled gaze, he couldn't wait to greet him and asked, "How is it? Did you get it?" "Don't worry, I've got it all." Douglas raised the things in his hand. Although his face was still not good, his tone was much more relaxed. "You guys go back first, I'll go to the police station with them, I want to see this guy go to jail with my own eyes." Hearing Douglas say this, Fred, who already had a bitter face, felt bitter in his heart. Waiting to see him go to jail? If he didn't go in today, would this gentleman plan to spend the night in the police station? The young master of the Douglas family, spending the night in the police station? If this is spread by people who don't know the truth, would he have a bad time? The more Fred thought about it, the more bitter he felt in his heart. He regretted it a little. He should have just patrolled well. Why did he run here? When Kinsey heard Douglas say this, he breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, and a few smiles appeared on his face. He said, "That's good, in this case, I will go back and wait for your good news. Don't worry, you guys go back quickly and take good care of Kerry." Douglas waved his hand and walked out of the hospital with a hurried step. He was a little impatient now. Seeing this, although Fred's face was still bitter, he had to stop temporarily and wave to the police in the hall. "Collect." In an instant, the hospital hall, which had just calmed down, was in chaos again. The doctors who had just been controlled were directly escorted out by the police. And these doctors seemed to realize something. Led by Adam Warren, the vice president, the doctors began to make a loud noise, hoping to attract other people's attention, or even the intervention of the hospital leaders. However, hope is beautiful, but reality is cruel. Not only did the hospital leaders not come out, but they also strictly ordered others not to interfere in this matter. Now, these guys made a fuss for a long time, but they were still taken to the police car one by one. Moreover, some policemen were annoyed by the noise, and gave these guys a vivid and lively political lesson as soon as they got in the car. Clean, don't you want to explain it? When the hospital hall returned to calm, Kinzu was just about to leave when Cargill stopped him with a serious face. What do you want to explain? Kinzu was not able to react to Cargill's sudden question. Frowning, Cargill pointed at the convoy in dissatisfaction and asked, "What are you doing? So mysterious." Looking at the direction of her finger, Kinzu finally reacted and walked out while smiling. Nothing, just taking a surveillance video. Surveillance video? What surveillance video? Cargill's expression became even more confused. Kinzu thought about it and told her that it didn't matter, so he explained the cause and effect of the matter to her. What did you say? Did the bastard doctor drink? Cargill was furious, and his expression looked like he wanted to eat someone. Did he drink or not? Didn't you see it at the time? Kinzu asked back with a pout. This. Cargill was speechless. After thinking about it carefully, it seems that it is true. Chapter 649 results released. After waiting until they returned to Christine's home, Cargill still looked a little dazed. She felt ashamed and a little guilty for believing the diagnosis of an alcoholic doctor. Clean, what's wrong with Cargill? Christine called Kinzu over and asked quietly after noticing that something was wrong with her best friend. She thought Kinzu had done something to Cargill to make her like this. Noticing Christine's thoughts, Kinzu raised his hands in surrender and said, "Chris, don't get me wrong, this really has nothing to do with me." Christine didn't quite believe it. Cargill was usually a very cheerful person. He just went to pick up a car, and now he was in this state, which was completely abnormal. Fortunately, when Kinzu didn't know how to explain the transformation, Cargill came over by himself. "I'm sorry, Chris, it's all my fault." "What?" Christine was a little confused, and couldn't understand why her best friend suddenly said this. Cargill didn't hide it either, and she explained the scene in the hospital in detail to Christine. After listening to this, although Christine was surprised and a little angry, she pretended to be calm on the surface. Patting Cargill's hand gently, Christine chuckled and comforted him. "Isn't it all over? Besides, I didn't tell it apart at the time. That's different. You were in pain at the time, so it's normal that you didn't pay attention to it, but I was still sober at the time." Cargill shook his head stubbornly. "Cargill." Christine's expression became serious, and she said seriously, "It's all over, and Doug has helped me get justice, so this matter is over." But Cargill was about to say something, but was suddenly interrupted by Christine. "There's no but, you were also anxious at the time, and it's normal that you didn't pay attention to these details." Kinzu nodded as he listened to it nearby. He also agreed with Christine's statement. Moreover, he was the one who told this matter. If there really was a gap between the two of them, it would be no fun. So, he also started to persuade Cargill, the matter has passed, and the parties involved will be punished accordingly. Don't blame yourself too much. After hearing what the two said, Cargill's mood recovered a little. Then, she suddenly thought of something, looked at Kinzu again, and asked expectantly, "Clean, that bastard will be punished, right?" Kinzu nodded decisively, "Don't worry, he will definitely be punished." As he was talking, the mobile phone in Kinzu's pocket suddenly vibrated. He took it out and saw that it was Douglas's call. He smiled and raised the phone, saying with a little exaggeration, "Speak of the devil will appear, it must be good news." The fact was not beyond Kinzu's expectation. After hanging up the phone, looking at the two women in front of him who were looking at him nervously, Kinzu smiled and said, "The matter has been basically determined. Bruce Arthur will be prosecuted this afternoon. The court will also make special arrangements and try to settle the matter today." "So soon?" The two girls were a little stunned. They found it a little unbelievable. Although the efficiency of the American police is not very slow, when did it become so fast? Kinzu raised his eyebrows, and thinking of the reason that Douglas stammered on the phone just now, he understood why this guy didn't call Christine directly. "Clean, what's wrong?" For some reason, Christine had an inexplicable feeling in her heart. Not only her, but even Cargill had an inexplicable feeling of fear. Ding-ling-ling, a sudden cell phone ringed and startled the two girls who were already a little distracted. "Yours?" Christine pursed her lips. "Isn't it yours?" Cargill looked surprised. Suddenly, the two reacted at the same time and picked up their mobile phones together. Seeing the two answering the phone with surprised expressions, Kinzu slipped out carefully. Are you kidding? I don't want to take the blame for this. After 2 or 3 minutes, Kajil walked out with a black face. Don't look at me, we have been together all the time, you should know whether it is me or not. Before she could finish her question, Kinzu stopped her first. You, Cargill was furious. She knew it was definitely not this guy, but he couldn't be so irresponsible, right? Just when she was about to argue with him, a familiar cell phone ringtone rang again. Oh my god, with a painful groan, Cargill had to pick up the phone and start dealing with the bombardment from various media and crews. Yes, Douglas notified the media directly to save trouble and to put enough pressure on the police station. A top Hollywood actress was misdiagnosed as having cancer by the hospital, which immediately aroused the interest of the media. Moreover, this news was spreading rapidly in that particular circle at a speed that seemed faster than lightning. The direct consequence of this situation was that Christine and Cargill's mobile phones exploded directly. Whether they knew each other or not, they all called to comfort this unfortunate guy, and also expressed their strong condemnation of the irresponsible doctor. So, at the trial held in the afternoon, under the gaze of more than a dozen local newspapers and media, the judge read out the final result. Bruce Arthur's medical license was revoked for misdiagnosis after drinking, and it caused quite serious social impact. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison and compensated Christine for various losses of $100,000. Although Kinzu felt that the sentence was a bit short and it was really difficult to vent his anger. But the court had its reasons for sentencing, and Kinzu really had no way to refute it. After all, no one died, and there was no huge economic loss. And the compensation was paid, and the medical license was revoked. You can't sentence him to 10 or 8 years for this. Christine and Cargill, who attended the trial, were very satisfied with the result and would not appeal. Walking out of the court, facing the various media and reporters who swarmed in, Christine, who had light makeup on her face but still couldn't hide her haggardness, also accepted an interview for the first time. Fortunately, knowing that she had just experienced a great ups and downs in her life, the media were quite sympathetic to her and asked questions that avoided irritating her as much as possible. Chapter 650 Zumengu arrives. A ray of sunlight in the early morning shone through the thick rose-red curtains into a not-so-large bedroom. The room, which was originally a little dim, was awakened by this ray of light, which also caused dissatisfaction among the people sleeping on the soft big bed. Perhaps because of overwork last night, Kinzu, who had just opened his eyes in a daze, actually had a short period of hypoxia in his mind. Shaking his head, Kinzu pulled his hand out of the softness and rubbed his eyes vigorously, which made him more awake. Leaning on the head of the bed, feeling the warmth of the two beauties on both sides of his body, Kinzu's heart was filled with a feeling called pride and satisfaction. It has been several days since the court's verdict. After dealing with the reporters, Christine and Cargill took Shirley out for a trip. According to them, they were too busy with work before, and the little girl was always in a confused state, so they didn't go out to play. Now, the little girl is fine. Although he is also very busy, after this incident, he has become more open-minded and has pushed some work aside. He wants to go out and relax. So, the two of them decided to abandon Kinzu decisively and take the little girl away. Thinking of this, Kinzu was still a little unhappy. Damn it, I worked so hard to send the little girl to you, and this is how you treat me. However, thinking of Christine's affectionate kiss before leaving, Kinzu felt more comfortable. Clean, you woke up so early. Why don't you sleep a little longer? A lazy voice sounded in Kinzu's ears, interrupting his meditation. He lowered his head and Mobuka's delicate little face appeared in front of him. A beautiful woman with half-open and half-closed beautiful eyes is born with a sense of laziness, especially a girl with such a delicate face. Kinzu's heart moved, and he leaned down, gave her a deep good morning kiss, and then said, I have something to do later, and I may go back to the ranch in the afternoon. Are you going back? Mobuka, who was a little confused by Kinzu's sudden attack, came back to her senses after hearing the words, and said reluctantly, You're going back so soon? Well, the ranch is busy recently. Kinzu said, but his hands were still moving around dishonestly. Although Mobuka was a little reluctant, she didn't say anything, but let Kinzu's big hands play tricks on her body. Although it feels good to be with Kinzu, compared to Onid, Mobuka still feels more comfortable with Onid. Well, at least at the time, she still took the initiative. At the moment when Kinzu turned over and pressed on her, such a thought flashed through Mobuka's mind. The moment he walked out of the apartment, Kinzu let the warm sunlight outside shine directly on his body, and his whole body was filled with a feeling called carefree. These days, he has never left the apartment with two young and energetic young women, and he vented out all the anger that he had been suppressing recently. This is also thanks to the good physical fitness of the young women. If it was someone else, he would have been tossed by him. The reason why he was so excited was that after Kinzu obtained the elementary medical skills, he found that his body hid such a big hidden danger. Well, it can't be called a hidden danger. Kinzu scratched his head. It was just because the spiritual energy often nourished his body, but he didn't exercise often, so he hit some overnutrition. It was not until Dale drove a brand new black Porsche Cayenne and stopped in front of Kinzu that he shifted his thoughts to the car. The pure black Porsche Cayenne in front of him was not Kinzu's new car, but Christine's new car. She drove the Cadillac away, saying that she wanted to go on a self-driving tour first. A Cadillac with a safety seat would be more convenient for Shirley. Kinzu was originally going to buy a car directly. Kin was rich and had money. But when Christine said that there was no one at home and she was worried about leaving the car here, she insisted that he drive it back. Kinzu had no choice but to drive it first. Of course, if others knew Kinzu's thoughts, they would probably spit on him. Are you still not satisfied with the Porsche Cayenne? What else do you want to drive? Boss, where are we going now? Dale saw that Kinzu had not spoken since he got in the car, so she had to come back to her senses and ask. Oh, Kinzu smiled and said, let's go to Kennedy International Airport. Dale didn't ask any more questions. She started the engine, drove the new car, and drove towards Kennedy Airport. Kennedy International Airport. Kinzu was holding a large sign that he had found temporarily and waiting at the terminal. On that card, there were 3 bold characters, Zumengyo. Yes, that's right, Zumengyo is coming. It's today's flight, and it will arrive soon. Kinzu, who had just crawled out of the bed of 2 big foreign horses, came to pick up his future wife. Well, I have to say that only Kinzu can do such a shitty thing. But he also has a reason, who made him have a physical problem. Someone argued that we are treating the disease and have nothing to do with love. Well, that's how calm we are. Of course, if you knew that before he went out, he not only changed all his clothes, but also washed himself thoroughly with 84, you wouldn't think so. After waiting for a while, Kinzu saw a plane slowly descending from mid-air. The plane stopped steadily, the cabin door opened, several ground staff set up the ladder, and passengers began to come out one after another. Among the group of passengers rushing out, Kinzu immediately set his eyes on the pretty figure. The camel-colored cashmere coat and the long, smooth black hair made her stand out in the crowd. As he got closer, the familiar face became clearer in Kinzu's eyes. Under the curved willow leaf eyebrows, a pair of beautiful eyes with fatal attraction were staring at him without blinking. The delicate and small cherry mouth was half open and half closed, as if telling something. Hey, idiot, have you seen enough? A voice that seemed to be happy and angry sounded in Kinzu's ears, which made him feel refreshed. I can't see enough in my whole life. Coming back to his senses, Kinzu threw away the useless cards in his hand and directly hugged the beauty who was dragging a suitcase in front of him. Well, what are you doing? There are so many people here. Zumengyo, who was embraced by Kinzu, faced his gaze that was staring straight at her, and felt nervous. However, before I could say no, I couldn't say it anymore. Findi est captulo much as great as Pelaga hasta el final. No esse olvident all like busgasms contenido exclusivo ixeo immediato. Si escrabata news teropatrian. Recurada, card alike, si escripsino donaking nos anima a continue. Great as a todos nos vemos on elpsmovdo.